It was a winter afternoon. Like most winter afternoons, it was overcast, cloudy with a bit of rain. The wind blew and the leaves rustled on the sidewalk as Cece and her friend Elizabeth walked home from school. "It was nice walking this way for a change," Cece said as the two strode along. Elizabeth smiled. "Thanks for joining me this way. I can't believe Brittany didn't show up again today. She didn't call or anything." Cece rolled her eyes. "Probably skipped and went to the lake with Glenn," Elizabeth laughed. "You're probably right. All right, well, I'll see you tomorrow." The two part ways, and Cece continued. She had just a few more blocks till she was home. As she walked along, she saw a scuffy dog pawing at something in the gutter. "Hey, little guy, what you after?" She crouched down and saw a bone stuck in the crack. Cece pried it loose, and the dog snatched it up and darted away towards the alley. The girl followed. "Hey, don't I at least get to pet you?" When she turned the corner, she saw the dog chewing on the bone at the feet of a boy sitting on a milk crate. He was wearing a gray hoodie, dirty jeans. He was tall and lanky with white hair, crystal blue eyes, and a skull that seemed to be painted on his face. "Well, hello," Cece said, a little surprised. "Is he your dog?" The boy looked at Cece with a puzzled expression. "Yes." Cece smiled. "Can I pet him?" Still confused, the boy looked at Cece closely. "Sure. Are you not sad?" Cece giggled as she pet the dog. "Why would I be sad?" "I don't know. Everyone I meet is sad," replied the boy. Cece frowned. "Well, that's horrible. Maybe if you didn't have the skull on your face, people would be in a better mood around you. It's a little late for Halloween, you know." The boy shrugged. "I can't help it. It's a part of me. I never met anyone that's been happy before." Cece turned to look at the boy's face so she could inspect the skull. She reached out and placed a timid hand upon his cheek. She attempted to smear what she thought would be paint, but realized it was the skin. She quickly dismissed the skull where her eyes met his. They were bright blue, appeared to illuminate at certain angles. She became disoriented, and she had to shake her head to clear her thoughts. She fumbled and stuttered her words. Your eyes, name. Yeah, what's your name?" The boy smiled. "I don't think I have a name. I'm a Jimberlin." "A what?" she replied. "A Jimberlin. I was created to serve a purpose," replied the boy. "What purpose?" Cece inquired with a puzzled look. "I don't think you want to know," he said as his eyes seemed to dim. Okay, so what do people call you?" Cece asked, becoming more confused. "The only person who had ever called me anything was my creator, and he only calls me Grumberlin," he said with hesitation. "That makes me sad. You need a name," Cece said before being interrupted by the boy. "No!" As he reached out and grabbed her arm. "Never be sad. My heart wouldn't take it." Cece was startled. "Why couldn't your heart take it? You just met me." "We're special. Your heart is special. My heart has no place to call home, and you have made it feel something. It never felt anything before," the boy said. "Hobo heart," Cece said with a smile. "Huh?" the boy asked, confused. "That's your name. The boy whose heart has no home. Hobo heart," Cece explained. "And now that you have a name, you and I can be friends." The boy smiled. Yes, I like it. My name. Hobo heart. "Okay. Well, I have to get home. You'll be here tomorrow so I can see you, right?" asked Cece. "Yes, of course," said Hobo Heart with a smile. Cece continued her walk home, but not long before looking over her shoulder one last time to inspect the mysterious boy. The next day, Cece came to the alley to see Hobo, where she rounded the corner where he was sitting there in the milk crate. He looked up and saw her, and his heartstrings began to quicken. "You actually came back," he said with a smile. "Well, of course I did, silly. Now let's do something besides sit in the alley," Cece said as she blushed. "What could we do?" asked Hobo. "Well, I don't know. Anything is better than sitting here," Cece said, pulling at Hobo's sleeve. "I know. Let's go to the park." Hobo followed. "Will there be people there?" "I'm sure," Cece said, laughing. Hobo fell reluctantly as he pulled his hood close to his face. The scruffy dog picked up a bone and chased after them. The two arrived at the park. It was full of people running around playing football, throwing frisbees, and playing on the equipment. The two walked over to the swings. "So, what's your story?" Cece asked. "I don't have a story. I have a purpose. It's That's all I know, Hobo answered. Well, what is the purpose you keep mentioning? Cece pried. Hobo looked down to the ground and kicked a rock. I have duties to take care of to prevent something bad from happening. What do you mean? Cece asked. Hobo shook his head. I don't want to talk about it. As the two talked, Cece looked up and noticed most of the people in the park had left. It was very quiet. The people who were still there were by themselves. Hobo looked around. I need to get going. Wait, do I get to see you tomorrow? Cece asked. No, Hobo said. There's something I have to do. Okay, how about the next day? She said as she looked. Hobo reached out and touched her blonde hair. If that's what you like. She took his hand and touched it to her face. It is. 2 days passed, and just as he had said, he met with her. They decided to go for a walk to the nearby lake. The two spent several days like this, just talking, laughing, and enjoying being in one another's company. Time seemed to slip away as the two grew closer together. One day after school, when she arrived at their usual meeting place, Hobo revealed that he had a surprise for her. He held out his hand and she took it. Hey, wait, before we go, I want to give this to you, Cece said as she reached into her pocket. Valentine's Day is coming up, and I was wondering if you'd be my Valentine. She handed Hobo a small envelope. What is a Valentine? Hobo asked as he opened the envelope. It had a hand-drawn picture of two hearts intertwined, with the words, Be Mine, above the drawing, and If you value your heart, you give me mine, written below. A Valentine is someone you care for and would be willing to give your heart to, because they'll protect you and care for you, she explained. So on Valentine's Day, you want me to give you my heart? He asked. Cece smiled. Well, only if you want to, Deal, he said as he hugged Cece. Now let's get going. You're gonna love this. The two headed out towards the country near the outskirts of town, and the small dog followed, as always wagging its tail. After walking a while in the woods, Hobo made Cece close her eyes. He took her hand and led the way for a few minutes, then stopped. Okay, look, he said with joy. When she opened her eyes, before her was a massive tree on a hill. It was very old, and its many branches twisted and curved in dozens of different directions. The leaves were lush and bright, unlike the trees surrounding it. The trunk was nearly 15 feet in diameter, and it was unlike any trees she had seen. The roots were more exposed than the normal trees. They seemed to come from different points in the ground, almost like the tree was composed of several different trees whose roots had grown together and had become entangled and formed one massive tree. It's so beautiful. It seems very special, almost magical, Cece said in wonderment as she gazed at the tree. Cece stepped closer to Hobo. She lifted his hood off his head and ran her fingers through his hair. His eyes widened as she moved in closer to kiss him. He pulled away. What's wrong? Haven't you ever kissed a girl before? She asked as she smiled. No, Hobo replied. Can I be your first? She asked. Hobo shook his head yes. She moved closer. Hobo embraced her and she kissed him. After the kiss, Hobo gathered himself and pointed to the tree. This is my purpose, to bring nourishment to the tree. As Hobo spoke, the scruffy dog ran towards the tree and disappeared into the extravagant root system. Your purpose? She asked with a puzzled look. Yes, I live here and take care of the tree. Hobo replied. Then why are you always in the alley? Cece asked. I wait there to gather what the tree inquires, Hobo said sharply. So you actually live in the tree? She inquired. Yes, he answered. I want to see your home, she asked, walking closer to the tree. Hobo shook his head. No, not yet. You're not ready for that. Can I touch the tree? Cece asked with an inquisitive tone as she reached her hand out. Hobo turned to her with a scowl and grabbed her hand away from the tree. No, you mustn't touch it. You have not prepared for what it will show you. Cece became nervous. Well, it's getting dark and I should be heading home soon. Hobo took her hand. Very well. I'll walk you down to town. As the two approached the small town, a group of people were walking on the edge of the woods with flashlights. The group near the couple. Cece, is that you? A voice called out. Yes, Cece replied. It's Elizabeth. Where the hell have you been? Cece's friend said frantically. Cece stumbled to the woods as Hobo backed out of the light and into the shadows. I've been with my friend. You've been avoiding us at school and too preoccupied to speak to your friends. Do you realize that Brittany's been missing for weeks and now Glenn's gone missing too? Elizabeth shouted. What? Are you serious? What do you mean they're missing? She looked in the trees and shadows and couldn't see Hobo. Her head became heavy and she could barely stand as she reached out of her friend to hold her up before she fell. "Come on, you can stay the night at my house," Elizabeth said. "Yeah, okay," Cece replied. The two spent the next day catching up on posting flyers and helping search of Brittany and Glenn. As they returned to Elizabeth's house in the afternoon, Cece became dizzy and ill again. "I think we're going to lie down for a while, if that's okay," Cece said as she spun her head. "Yeah, sure. Crash in my room," Elizabeth said. "Hey, don't let me sleep for too long. I need to go to town and meet up with someone," Cece said as she headed upstairs. Yeah, lover boy, I'm sure," Elizabeth said as she rolled her eyes. Later, Cece woke up in a cold sweat. She frantically looked outside. It was nighttime. "Oh, no. She got up and ran to Elizabeth's room. Elizabeth was lying asleep on the couch. Cece shook Elizabeth. "Hey, wake up. What time is it?" "Hey, chill out. I don't know. Look at my phone." Elizabeth was still half asleep. Cece fumbled around in the dark and found her phone. It was 11:34. "Oh no, I need to go find him." Cece started to tremble. "Hey, look, whatever this guy is, he's no good for you. You've been slacking at school when you're there. Your parents are worried. Only God knows what's happening to Brittany and Glenn, and you don't even care. You've totally lost yourself because of some guy. Spend a little more time away from him and see how you feel," Elizabeth scolded. Cece hung her head. "Yeah, I guess you're right. Guess I got a little carried away." A day passed. Cece attended the school and hung out with her friends. Elizabeth repeatedly bugged her about a boy named Jim that had a crush on Cece. She finally gave in and said she would go on a date with Jim if Elizabeth and her boyfriend joined them. The day of the date came. She met her friends at a local restaurant. Jim seemed nice enough, kind of a jock and a little more aggressive than guys she had gone on dates with before. Things went well, though. When they went outside to leave, Jim offered to give her a ride home. She didn't feel comfortable with it and asked Elizabeth and her boyfriend Mike to give her a ride home. The next day at school, Cece opened up her locker and a piece of paper fell out. She picked it up and looked at it. It was the Valentine she had made for Hobo. When she touched it, flashes of Hobo and memories of the time spent with him ran through her mind. She started to panic and her palms became sweaty. She looked around frantically. How did it get there? She wondered. Right then, Elizabeth walked up. "Hey, you okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Elizabeth said. "Yeah, I just need to let loose a little. I'm stressing," Cece said as she rubbed her forehead. "Over that guy?" Elizabeth asked. "You need to quit worrying about that guy. He seems a little creepy anyway. It's Friday night and my parents are out of town. I bet Mike can get some booze and we can invite Jim over. How's that sound?" Cece giggled and nodded her head. "Let's do it." Later that night, the four of them met at Elizabeth's house. Her parents left some cash for pizza. They'd had a few beers when Mike suggested a game of truth or dare. A beer or two later, Cece had loosened up, and when she blurted to make out with Jim, it didn't seem like it was such a bad idea. Jim led her upstairs when they started making out on Elizabeth's bed. As Jim ran his hand up Cece's shirt, a dog began barking outside. "Jesus Christ, what's with Elizabeth's damn dog?" Jim sighed. "Elizabeth doesn't have a dog," Cece replied as she peered at the window. A chill ran up her spine as she saw the little scruffy dog that had accompanied Hobo, jumping around and barking. Cece ran down the stairs and opened the door. She walked around the side of the house and the dog was gone. She scanned the yard and street and saw nothing. She went back inside and told Elizabeth that she needed to call it a night. "Aw, come on. Why not stay a little longer?" Jim begged. "No, I need to get going," Cece said. "All right, need me to get you a ride home?" Jim offered. "Are you okay to drive?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. I do it all the time," Jim replied with a cocky smile. "All right then, let's go," Cece shrugged. On the drive home, Jim was paying more attention to Cece than the road. He grabbed at her thigh. "Keep your eyes on the road," she yelled, and he pushed away his hand. Jim looked up at the road, just in time to swerve and missed a parked car. Shaken, Cece said, "That's it. Pull over. I'll walk the rest of the way home." Jim locked the brakes. "Fine. Be a bitch about it." Cece got out of the car and slammed the door. "What an asshole." Jim sped off. As she began to walk the rest of the way home, she pulled her jacket closer as the cold night air ripped at her cheek. A few houses from home, she heard rustling in the leaves behind her. She quickened her pace. She looked over her shoulder. Maybe she'd watched too many scary movies, but it felt like someone was watching her. She reached home and quickly unlocked the door and slipped inside. breathing heavily as she locked the door behind her. She felt a hand brush across her shoulder. "Everything okay, honey?" her dad asked as she jumped. "Yeah, Dad, just a long night. I'm off to bed." The next morning, Cece was awoken by Elizabeth plopping down on her bed. "Happy Valentine's Day," she said annoyingly. Cece peeked up from underneath her blankets. "What time is it?" "Time to get your ass up. We're going shopping. We're going to get some outfits for tonight. We're going to the movies with the guys," Elizabeth shouted. "I'm not going if Jim's going to be there. He almost got us killed last night. I don't want to be around him," Cece said. "Oh, stop. He was just drunk. Get over it," Elizabeth pleaded. The girls got to the mall. As they went store to store, Elizabeth started to notice how melancholy everything seemed. "Shouldn't everyone be in a better mood? It's Valentine's Day, jeez," Elizabeth said, looking around her. "Yeah, I noticed that too," Cece said as she scanned the crowd. The two finished their shopping and headed to the parking garage. Elizabeth opened the trunk and placed their bags inside as she carried on the plans for the night. Mid-sentence, Elizabeth stopped talking. Cece asked what was wrong, and she turned to look at her. Elizabeth stood staring at the ground and she began to sob. "Hey, what's wrong?" Cece asked as she grabbed her hand. Her hand felt cold and her eyes were fixated on the ground. Elizabeth was completely unresponsive. She just stood there sobbing. Just then, she felt something touch her leg. As she looked down, she saw the small, scruffy dog with the bone in its mouth. She quickly looked up and Hobo was standing there. "Have you been following me?" she asked. "I sent him to watch over you." Hobo nodded towards the dog. "I don't need to be watched over. What's wrong with Elizabeth? Why are you doing this to her?" Cece said, becoming irritated. "I didn't mean to. I told you, everyone is sad," Hobo said as his shoulders sank. "You need to go," Cece shouted as she pushed Hobo away. "It's your Valentine's Day. I thought I was going to give you my heart," Hobo asked. "No, not anymore. You're not like me. You can't be with me. You need to go," Cece implored as she began to cry. Hobo turned and walked away with the dog following. As the pair exited out of sight, Cece noticed the dog had left its bone. Upon closer inspection, the bone appeared to have fresh blood on it. As Cece knelt down to get a closer look, Elizabeth startled her. "What the hell was that? Are you ready to go or what?" Cece stood up and examined Elizabeth's face. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, why wouldn't I be?" Elizabeth asked as she chuckled and closed the trunk. "Let's go." "Yeah, okay." Cece got into the car and glanced around one last time. Later that night, the girls arrived at the movie theater to watch a movie with Mike and Jim. As the girls pulled in, Cece saw the guy standing next to Jim's car. As Cece exited the car, Jim placed his hand on her shoulder. "You okay? I'm sorry about last night. I shouldn't have been driving. I was stupid." Cece nodded her head. Well, at least he apologized, he thought to herself. The group went to see more cheesy horror movies. She sat with Jim. He was being a creep and kept trying to make out. She repeatedly denied his advances. After the movie ended, Elizabeth and Mike walked over to Cece and Jim. "Hey, Jim, can you give Cece a ride home? We got other plans and not enough room in the car," Elizabeth winked. "Hey, no, guys. Can I get a ride with you? You can drop me off at my place," Cece pleaded. "Nope, Jim's a big boy. He can handle you," Elizabeth skipped off. Jim chuckled. "Hey, come on. I'm not so bad." Cece rolled her eyes. "Please, just take me home." Jim opened the car door. "Ladies first." Cece reluctantly got into the car, and as she didn't talk much as they traveled along, she noticed that they had missed her turn. Jim had driven them to the park near Cece's neighborhood, parking the car and turned the lights off. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to take me home," Cece said in disgust. "Oh, come on, just one kiss. You didn't have a problem with it the other night," Jim said with a sinister grin. As he leaned near her, Cece slapped Jim in the face and got out of the car and started to run. Jim chased after her. He caught up to her and tackled her. She started to scream. Jim struck her repeatedly and told her to shut up. Her lip and nose started to bleed. He then ripped her shirt, pawed, and groped at her body. She closed her eyes in terror as she frantically tried to fight him. She heard a loud crack. Jim had stopped. She opened her eyes and saw Jim lying on the ground and a tall, lanky figure standing over her. He took his hoodie off and put it on her. Her vision was blurry, eyes swollen from being hit. His skin was gray, almost black, and had a skeletal system on his arm and chest to match the skull on his face. It was Hobo. He knelt down next to her. She couldn't see clearly what he was doing, but she could hear ripping and tearing of flesh and the horrible sound of blood splattering. She put herself to her knees and called out, "Hobo." He reached down and handed her something. She took it. She then realized it was still beating. It was beating heart, pulsating in her hands. She looked up at him. He placed his hands on either side of her face and tilted her head up and said, "I value my heart. You can keep it. I don't need it anymore," and kissed her on the forehead. She passed out. Cece woke up in her bed. She got up to look in the mirror. She had no injuries. She looked herself over and could see no damage from the night before. What had happened? Was she dreaming? She walked downstairs. Her mother was cooking breakfast and her father was reading the paper. "Mom? Dad?" she asked. Her dad looked over. "Hey, you. How was last night?" "What do you mean?" Cece asked. "Well, Elizabeth's mom called this morning. Apparently she didn't make it home last night after she dropped you off and saw the news that some kids were missing. Didn't know if you knew anything about it. We figured it was just kids being kids. You don't know anything, do you?" her father asked, looking up from his paper. No, Cece replied. Cece's heart sank. She ran upstairs and started looking through her phone, looking through her room, in her closet, in her drawers. She sat down on her bed. Then she heard it. Thump, 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 thump. She looked under the bed. It was Hobo's hoodie. She pulled it out beneath her bed and unfolded it. Inside was Hobo's heart, still beating. "Oh no," she thought. "Hobo, what happened? I needed to find him." She folded the hoodie back and put on some shoes and ran downstairs. She told her parents that she was going to check on Elizabeth and see if she'd be home soon. Carrying the hood, she ran across town into the woods. The wind picked up and it started to rain. She got near the spot where Hobo made her close her eyes. She began to call out for him. "Hobo! Hobo!" It was raining hard now. She looked all around. She saw Hobo's dog running through the woods. She called out to him. He looked up and saw her and darted over and began licking her. He was covered in blood. She fell to her knees. "Oh no, Hobo's hurt. Take me to him." The scruffy dog jumped and twirled around. Cece got to her feet and followed the little dog to the tree. The tree was no longer vibrant and full of color. It was black and looked to be dying. All the leaves had fallen off the limbs, were lifeless and low-hanging. The dog went around to the back of the hill. Cece could see an opening. She ducked down and started to walk in. She stumbled and reached out to grab the roots to break her fall. Then she touched the tree. Her heart was filled with great sorrow. She saw flashes in her mind of faces upon faces of lifeless people, dead people. Then 6 faces appeared, horrible faces, twisted and demonic. She managed to get back to her knees and crawl in the hole. It was a circular room. It was dimly lit by 6 braziers. The flames in the braziers were black and purple, unlike any fire Cece had ever seen. There were bones strung across the ground. The ground itself was pooling with blood. She frantically looked around and saw Brittany, Glenn, Jim, Elizabeth, and Mike entangled in the roots. She screamed and ran towards her friends, but when she approached, she retracted and realized it was far too late. It was like the roots had come to life and were squeezing their bodies. Bones were cracking and breaking. Their innards were spilling forth. The small dog was ripping at an opening in Elizabeth's chest, pulling a bone loose and began to shake it like it was a toy as he bounced across the room. Long, stringy roots hung down above each of Cece's friends. Their hearts had been removed and now hung above their intertwined roots. It looked like the tree was almost feeding off its hearts, absorbing the life of each soul from the tree. There was a 6th cluster of roots with no body and no heart. Next to an empty cluster of roots lay Hobo. He lay lifeless and still. Cece crawled through the horror and carnage to get to him. She rolled him over. His chest was torn open, and there was a gaping wound where he had removed his heart. His eyes fluttered open and met hers. He blinked. Then his eyes got wider. "Why?" he asked. Cece began to cry. "Why? What? Why'd you kill my friends? How could you do this? You're a monster," she screamed. Hobo struggled for life. "I saved you. Protect you from these people. I told you not to touch the tree. You were special. You should have brought my heart here. You shouldn't have brought my heart here. I failed my purpose." Cece pounded on Hobo's chest. "What purpose? Murdering people? Destroying lives?" Cryptic chanting in a foreign tongue began echoing on the walls. Hobo cleared his throat as he clung to life. "Must keep the 6 here. With 6 hearts, only 5 gathered. Saved you. Didn't get 6. Too late. Cece grabbed the hoodie. Use your heart! Give them your heart! She unwrapped the hoodie. Hobo's heart was barely beating. It was black and dying. Hobo looked at his heart, and his rage began to build. He looked into Cece's eyes. I valued it, so I gave it to you. You were supposed to protect it. Now you wish to destroy it? Cece became enraged. You murdered my friends! Hobo's arm shot up and palmed Cece's chest. His fingers and thumb penetrated her skin. Do you value your heart? He demanded. He squeezed his hand into a fist, ripping her shirt and flesh from her body. She fell to the ground, gasping for air. The chanting grew louder as Hobo rose to his feet. He arched his back, and large black feathered wings extended from his body. His eyes glowed fiercely. He then used his fist to crush Cece's chest as he struck her repeatedly. He then grabbed a protruding rib bone and ripped it through her body, exposing her chest cavity. She lay motionless as he reached inside of her and removed her heart. The roots from the ceiling extended to receive her heart. Hobo looked at the roots and then back to Cece. No. He then placed Cece's heart into the opening of his own chest. He found a small sliver of bone from the ground and took hair from Cece's head and began to sew himself together. The small blood-soaked dog whimpered as the side as he forced crude bone in and out of his flesh. Don't worry. It'll do for now, though. It won't last. It will need to be replaced. When he was done, he patted the dog on the head, walked over and picked up his heart and placed it on Cece's chest. You can keep it. I don't need it anymore. He knelt down, kissed her on the forehead one last time. As he stood up, he noticed something laying on the ground beside her. It was the valentine she had made for him. He picked it up and held it in his chest, then placed it in his back pocket. Hobo then turned to the 6 browsers over and set the room ablaze. The room was quickly engulfed in flames. The fire burned unnaturally fast as the purple and black flames reached higher. Hobo then exited the opening in the hill. As he walked away, 6 skeletal figures exposed of black smoke crawled up out of the roots and flames, screeching and screaming as they cackled. At least, we are free. Hobo grinned as he walked away, the tree burning fiercely despite the rain. The Sailor Moon franchise is something that everyone might have heard of back in the 1990s. For those of you who don't know what it is, Sailor Moon is an anime franchise where the girl, originally Serena, but most popularly known as Sailor Moon, goes through many different adventures with her Sailor Scouts and fight against evil. Even though Serena gets clumsy or is a crybaby a lot of the times in the show, she still faces her fears and goes through a lot of tough challenges. To my knowledge, the original English name started its release in the year 1995, with Fox being the first TV station to air the show, along with WB, Warner Brothers, if I recall correctly, and UPN, United Paramount Network. I've heard rumors in various anime forums that there is one episode that didn't make the final cut, or that it never had a chance to air on one of the stations. I have no other knowledge about the release of Sailor Moon, so I had to research where the series is originally animated from. So, I live in Ekaruno, Tokyo, and the animation studio is located near the headquarters of Azumi. My parents and I took an hour-and-a-half road trip to the place, but there was a tad delay of traffic in the way. It was a cluster of cars and trucks zooming in by honking or beeping all around us. As I took a closer look at what was going on, I saw a police officer take out a piece of brigade tape and cross it in front of the exit that appeared to lead out of the studio. The tape marked yellow and black, warning, do not cross. I just realized that we're almost there, but what was the tragic incident that happened outside the Toei Animation building? A car crash? Murder? No, don't think too deep about this. Just leave it and move on. A minute later, we drove to the parking lot until I got out of the car. My mom and dad dropped me off as they made their way to the nearby mall of the building. After I did my research from before, I remembered watching a video. The managers were toured guests to different rooms inside of the building. Memorizing which room they are, I snuck inside and went 1 flight of stairs that led to the editing room. I swiftly opened up the door and many staff members who worked on Sailor Moon series turned their heads towards me, thinking that I was not supposed to be there in the first place. Instead of, one of them greeted me and asked if I was new here. I answered yes, as they invited me into the room. I questioned them about the rumor of an unreleased episode of Sailor Moon, and surprisingly, none of them answered or knew what it was. It came to my head that there are 3 possibilities. They might have knew something that I didn't. They could have seen the copy for themselves, or they just happened that they didn't know. It's either because they don't really know what happened, or they might have no clue on what I was talking about. Although they're staff of the series, I was thinking that the whole unaired episode rumor could be made up. After all, anyone could lie on the internet. I decided to skim through the archives bin and stacked up on the tapes on top of the desk. I managed to go through all of them and found one copy of a particular tape. The label was ripped off, revealing a middle bit of the logo with what looks like the letter S, with its unusual Sailor Moon font I recall seeing on the other tapes. This could be it, I thought. I called for the whole crew to take a look at it, before one of them answered to me that the tape was too damaged and dusty. When I put it in the VCR and tried to prove them wrong, the screen focused and remained on the static for a good 30 seconds. It could have been damaged for good, or the tape wasn't able to record any of the data of the episode. This was when I thought I could have been the first draft. I asked the crew member if I could borrow his seat, and he was okay with it. When I digitalized the tape to the computer, I noticed that the VHS had an actual recording of the footage. I know this might be too far-fetched at this point, but if internet's rumors serve me right, the file name on the very footage was labeled as sailorcry.wmv. I just thought that it was a montage of Sailor Moon crying like she does in every other episode, but I started to think that I was wrong. I double-clicked on the video file and prepared for trouble. The scratching from the VHS tape got worse in the case, so the scanning was destroyed throughout while cutting half of the vocals of the instrumental during the opening scene. After the introduction, it skipped right to the show. No cutesy little card like in the other episode. It just skipped to the episode. The dark screen abruptly brightened to a realistic drawn image of Sailor Moon. She didn't look like herself in the original anime at all, but more like an actual human. The background behind her looked like it was twisting and moving in different colors, while Sailor Moon stood at the center of the screen, grinning in an evil manner. Her eyes were gouged out, black and bleeding, as her hair was standing up and still. Her 2 scraggly pigtails were curled up as high as a sad brow. The only thing I felt was the most unsettling about this entire scene was the soundtrack. However, I wouldn't even call it a soundtrack at all. All I could hear was a screech being played, accompanied by a rhythmic glitch and analog of unusual beats from the tape. Another part that was rather disturbing for me was her gaping mouth, all black, revealing big gums and crooked teeth. Her nose was short and bent as it oscillated back and forth in sync with how bad and distorted it was getting. The scene happened for a good 20 seconds before the image quickly cut to her entire face, almost covering up the screen. Serena's hair appeared unkept and black, with strands swaying back and forth. Her smiling eyes were moving around and stopped every second to look at us. I was the only one who wanted to look away the most. Despite how grotesque she looked, I couldn't turn my back because I felt like she was watching my every move. I will never forget her face to this day. I don't know how to describe it any further, but the way her mouth was still up to her old, crumbled-up nose and below her big chin unnerved me as well. None of the staff members dared to look at the screen. There was an ear-splitting scream that bursted through the speakers, almost sounding like a woman, with faint static coming as the background noise. This went on for 15 seconds before she gave out the most frightening and appalling gasp we'd ever heard. Spiders crawling out of her left cheek, now exploding and gushing with black blood. Her mouth agape as she let out a horrifying and gut-wrenching shriek on the top of the noise. The scream didn't even sound like it came from a normal human at all. It was more like a broken chainsaw and an animal getting slaughtered. The scream went on for 20 seconds before it got cut off by another image of Sailor Moon lying on the floor with dizzy purple bleeding eyes running down her nose. The background was once again moving and morphing into different positions of colors. I heard an infant crying very painfully and heartbroken in the background. I could have sworn I heard a woman talking along with a baby voice, trying to cheer them up. After this played, the scene flickered to a man dressed up in a tuxedo. I couldn't tell what was going on because of the colors in the background were still transforming together, but this time into a small, quick blobs flashing from one place to another through the scene. The man walked up to a child, who appeared to be writing something on the desk before he smashed the boy's head through it. His screams sounded up close like he was shouting into a microphone. They were somewhat cut off from how worse the tape's distortion was getting, and the buzzing of the static turning into a looping, loud, and crumbling noise of analog. The camera cut to a close-up of the boy's face, brutally beaten and bleeding from the mouth. One side of his face was smashed into what would look like broken glass, and a few of his teeth were ripped out. The man put his head down to the boy, smashing his face once more through the desk. After seeing the spots of blood that blotched up the screen, I knew at this point I had to look away. However, I still had one eye on the screen, so I watched the boy pick up his head off the desk, blood gushing out of his throat like a waterfall, and he let out a strange sound bellow. I could see the man's hand smashing through the poor boy's face again, before the screen went entirely black for a few seconds. The crumbling distorted of the tape was bothering me, and I heard a familiar voice of Sailor Moon's crying really hard. It sounded more human though, but it wasn't the actress that did it in the few episodes. A few seconds passed as the cries from the girl got more and more intense until I heard choking noises. I also heard the boys bellowing again, then a deep voice that overlapped on top of the sounds. The screen that played a short bit of Sailor Moon episode, but I couldn't tell what it was. Then a deep voice overlaid the sounds. The screen then played a short bit of Sailor Moon episode, but I couldn't tell what it was due to the horrible distortion from the tape during the short episode. A man's voice said in a frightening manner, "All of my close friends and family are dead. Sailor Mars has been beheaded. Sailor Mercury has been assassinated. Sailor Venus has been raped." There are many more of her friends that she had listed before being killed in the worst way possible. The scary thing about this part was montage of a realistic drawing depiction of each Sailor Scout's death. "I know what must be done," quivered Sailor Moon. She sighed, grabbing a knife out of her desk and jabbed it into her arm as she screamed a loud, strange wail. It was descending and was not meant for her. It sounded more like a man crying for help. The sound of the knife rubbing and cutting into the girl's flesh was painful. It made me recoil in fear. Dark red liquid gushing out of her arm as she started to cry. She still kept cutting through her skin until grotesque pictures of murder, death, and suicide flashed through the screen within 15 frames each. One of the staff members vomited on the floor, while another ran out of the room. The screen went black for a couple of seconds, and everything remained silent. No sound was playing this time. Not even the feedback from the speakers picked up anything. The background cut to the end credits of Sailor Moon, but the song was a vintage music box playing instead of the usual reprise. There was no animators who wrote this episode, nor storyboard directors or sound effect editors who worked on it. All that was shown on the screen was a montage of different Sailor Moon episodes with names scrolling past the screen. It was pretty confusing on why they used different people instead of the original crew that worked on the series. After the credits ended with the tune, the screen faded to black with the tape still running. I heard a deep, quivering voice with incoherent speech. It wasn't a language. After 5 seconds, the voice stopped. The tape finished the episode. Needless to say, I got scared out of my mind after watching this episode. It really made me think that I never wanted to watch another episode of Sailor Moon again. The staff members looked at one another, wanting to know what the hell just happened. I explained the whole thing and that the reason why they didn't answer from before was that they wanted to keep the tape a secret and hidden from everyone at all times. I'm sorry I stayed. I heard the door open and they came in. There came in my parents, asking what was going on. I told them the whole story, and one of them told me to get out there this instant. I wanted to know why, but my dad grabbed my hand and we all rushed out of the toy animation building and into the car. Traffic was still going on as we drove a bit. We stopped by the exit and I asked the police officer what was happening. He told me an incident at the studio and mentioned that there was a man who broke into the editing room and hijacked the cartoon series, purposely airing an inappropriate episode on one or more stations. That episode frightened kids so much it made them commit suicide in various ways, but mostly cutting themselves like the girl from the tape shown as Sailor Moon. The police officer added on that the animator had murdered 10 or more individuals in the building. 2 of them jumped off at the highest window. 2 that had been decapitated, 1 that had been raped, and another was a young boy that died of traumatic brain injury. The strangest thing I thought was that I imagined the young boy as a child who had skull been severely smashed on the desk, and the Sailor Scouts from the episode died the similar way those individuals had died. Another thing, the police officer told me that the animator forced the voice of Sailor Moon to do a dying voice. From what he was told, she said she couldn't or the animator would get mad and punched her in the forehead and gave her a bruise. She remained unconscious as he left her in pain, running around in every room, murdering everyone in the worst way that could be done by any human possible. Another strange thing that still frightens me even to this day is that the list of people who were either part of the animation crew or that they were the victims of random people that died. If the animator was still there in the studio, silently and patiently waiting from God knows where, I would be the next one on his list. Little known fact is that the Eisenhower interstate system is built over major ley lines. Rumor has it that if specific conditions are met, weird phenomena will occur. Phenomena of the first. The first sign of this phenomenon is that you will lose all radio reception and devices such as MP3 players, Diceman, tape disc, or other music players will cease functioning. Your heater will begin to only dispense cold air, regardless of setting. After the first mile of this, you will notice a fog growing over the edge of the road, and you will see no exits, regardless of whether they were supposed to be there. If you continue on, you will begin to see the occasional pedestrian. Some of them will gesture you that they would like to hitch a ride. Under no circumstances should you stop for them. No one has ever stopped and survived. If you see lights approaching from behind and it is a hearse, do not let it pass you, no matter what. After 13 miles, the phenomenon will end and you will be safe. Phenomenon of the second. Investigated by the witness after they read instructions that they found in a book left behind in a rest stop area, participants must mix a shot of whiskey and a drop of their own blood, 1 drop for each participant, pinch of salt, and a small amount of used engine oil. Mix the water from the rest stop fountain in a bottle and smash into the interstate in the evening or morning. If their instructions were followed correctly, they will become densely foggy. An unmarked exit will appear, and if you pass by it, it will be closed to you for 6 years. If you take the exit, go left and under the interstate. Half a mile down the road is an old gas station. Inside, it is said that a full glass of coffee sold there. Will keep you awake at night, and the other food and beverages are purported to have various properties themselves. Pay the proprietor over a metal coinage, no bills, no checks, no card. There are also some arcade machines near the back of the store, as well as an old fortune-telling wizard in a glass case. He knows how you will die. Accept no sexual favors that are offered to you while there, and do not anger anyone. Your life depends on it. After my parents' divorce, and for too many years, my twin sister Jenny would wake me up unexpectedly in the middle of the night. Her demeanor would always be frightened and scared when she did. It always reminded me of when we were kids and she would escape to my room, away from our drunken and abusive mother. Jenny would sit on the floor at the side of the bed and brush at my hand as we stared at each other in a comforting embrace. 5, sometimes 10 minutes would go by until she would start to pull away, and I know it was over. We would never talk, but we would have that moment like these. She just needed a place to escape. A September night nearly 4 years ago was different. Jenny was unexpectedly frightened and crying inconsolably. For the first time since we were children, I could feel her grasp my hand to wake me. Her grip was cold, damp, and trembling in fear. She was so scared and helpless that I felt equally scared and helpless. This is a common empathy twins share, especially so for Jenny and I. After 20 minutes of comforting her and holding her as tight as I could, I felt her slipping away again. This time she begged and pleaded to stay with me. We would never talk during escapes, but that night was different. As I lunged and jumped to keep her from floating away, I lost my ability to feel and touch her. She floated up onto the popcorn ceiling and was dragged across the harsh surface until she melted into the sheet rocks and out of sight. The vision of her petrified face and desperate extended left hand will forever be seared into my memory. Her husband must have been exceptionally rough that night 4 years ago, much like my mother often was when Jenny was a child. When I watched her fade away, I knew I would never see her again. For some reason, I just knew. Confirming that I already knew, I received the bad news the next morning about her violent murder and rape at the hands of her husband. Even though I already knew the how and why, the police never could explain the scrape marks and dust on Jenny's back. I guess I could have told them, but what good would it have done anyway? Only a twin would and could understand. I had never felt the embrace of my sister in nearly 10 years prior to that moment. For whatever reason, I was able to feel her again for one last time. To be with her when she needed me most, like I always was when we were children. It never mattered that we were always 1,000 miles apart. People barely wandered through the territory anymore due to the weather getting colder, which bore the watchdog of the infamous Slenderman's turf. She wasn't biologically a dog, but she had earned the name of guardian of the perimeter, crawling on all fours and notorious for aerial attacks. She spotted a faded red yet tattered hoodie, sleeves rolled up to reveal self-inflicted wounds which had healed and left nothing but scars, along with dark gray handkerchief tied around her neck and the operator symbol embroidered onto it, signifying that she was indeed a meat puppet of the tall man. She also had stained beige cargo pants, black heavy-duty combat boots, and a mask with gruesome, haunting attributes. Its black, empty, hollow eyes, its wide, cryptic smile, and the dried-out, bladdered bloodstains from her previous victims could strike fear into the core of anyone sane. Her most well-known trait were her gloves, which contained sharp, curved metal claws at the fingertips. All those features contributed to what she was, Slenderman's proxy. Rogue trudged through the underbrush, scooting away scattered human remains that gave up the musk decay every now and then with her boots whilst going through the heavy accommodated fog. For a fact, she knew no hunts were going to be made today. No human in the right mind would take a hiking trip this early in the day. For crying out loud, it was twilight hour. The masked proxy didn't seem to find anything interesting to do in the meantime. The others were still asleep, and she was on duty to watch the claimed terrain. She scaled up onto the treetops and found a sturdy branch to lounge on while she kept close watch from above. As the sky became a lighter hue and the sun rose, there was more life in the forest. Not just the chirping of cicadas, but the unmistakable voices of human beings. No, I haven't found Greg yet, honey. I'm trying. The cops aren't doing much, and I feel like I've been a terrible father if I don't do something about it. It's been 3 weeks, Kyla. The voice belonged to an adult male from the sound of it. Finally, after weeks of waiting for something worth prying on. Rogue sat there in the fetal position, digging her metal claws in the branch as she listened attentively to pick up where the noise was coming from. Once she pinpointed the location, she was off, transitioning from treetop to treetop, emitting high-pitched coyote-like noises. Once she caught sight of the wandering, lanky, middle-aged man who was chattering on the phone. Rogue's shackles creased the light, airy chuckles from swiftly moving through treetop, branch to branch, causing leaves to rustle with her quick momentum. She continued toying with her victim. Seeing him drenched in fear almost was enough to encourage her to continue tormenting him. As she transitioned from tree to tree, she began her haunting animal-like yipes, sending shivers down the man's spine. "I'll call you back, sweetie," he stuttered as he clicked to end the call and dropped the phone due to a trembling hand, trying to muster up enough courage to produce a coherent sentence. Gregory? He muttered pathetically, hoping it was his lost loved one. Little did he know that his son had fallen victim to the Slender Man. After a while of toying with his weakness, he stopped on a sturdy branch above him, looming over and stared down to the withering man of the dark, hollowed eyes. He could hear the muffled sound of heavy breathing coming from above him. A malice cryptic grin, blood-stained mask obscured the predator's face. "Don't look up, or you'll regret it," she cooed again, tapping her clawed fingertips against the wooden bark before digging her sharp metal nails against it, causing the flesh wound to bleed sap and drip onto the man's head. The danger was more than anything he had ever encountered. The gruesome attributes of the creature almost made her even seem inhuman. He began to shriek and stammer backwards as he saw the horror before him. Rogue lunged herself onto the branch and onto him, knocking him back off his feet and onto the ground, straddling him tightly and began slashing at his feet. Her claws cutting through the flesh like butter and twisted his arms until they broke. The defenseless man began howling in pain as he tried to fight the proxy off of him, but to no avail. She had him pinned down and was literally tearing him apart. His cries were only music to her wicked ears as she used the tip of her claws to penetrate through his eyes, hooking it and ripping the sphere out of the socket and ogled it before tossing it aside and doing the same to the other. She continued her torture until she gave out the final blood-curdling cry that echoed through the woods. "You shouldn't be wandering through here, stranger." The murderer chuckled as the disfigured man lay dead in his own crimson liquid. Boom. A loud clap of thunder shakes you out of your reverie. Your head jerks up and your mouth shuts. Hastily, you wipe off any drool you might have on your chin and glance around to make sure no one noticed. Good. Everything's the same. Miss Bertan groaning on, kids staring lack-jawed at the window or the clock. A normal Monday morning in first period. However, you have the strangest feeling in the pit of your stomach. It wasn't supposed to rain today. Why is it so cold? You shiver and look around, try to see if anyone else is cold. You catch the eye of a weird new kid named Jeff. He gives you a slight smile that is more of a grimace. You think he's probably just another new kid smiling and greeting while grimacing at the lecture, but you vow to stay on your guard. Today is going to be a bad day, your instinct tells you. It will be best to start something new, and that something is not going to be good. A shadow falls across the window, shading the door, something looming towards it. You catch your breath, heart pounding like crazy, and the door slowly creaks open. You breathe, hitches in your throat. Phew, it's just the secretary. Miss Pepperdine? She tells Miss Burdan that she needs to borrow one of her students for just an second. And with a smile too peppy to be on anyone's face on a day like today, she beckons to you. You gulp, slowly rise and shake from head to foot, walk out of the classroom. As you follow her down the hallway towards the principal's office, you hardly dare think of what could happen. Miss Pepperdine is only called upon to escort to the office during horrible circumstances. Clickety-clack. Her shoes say as she walked purposely towards the office door. Coming out of the door is your school's psychologist, a severe businesslike woman. She looks back to the office and says, "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not qualified enough to handle an issue as serious as this." She walks past you as she fixes you with a stare filled with a mixture of pity and horror. Miss Pepperdine claps her hand together with an overly cheery smile, saying, "Well, I guess this is your cue," and ushers you through the door. Your hands are clammy and you think rather morbidly, "This is the last second of my previous normal life. Whatever happens in here is going to change everything forever." You walk inside and your mouth instantly goes dry as you see the scene. Your parents are sitting opposed to the principal, looking at you with complex expressions of horror, despair, and disappointment. Your mom, upon seeing you, smiles weakly and says, "Hi, honey. We found your tumbler." My real name is Cody, and since the very beginning, I've been an unwanted child. I never knew who my father was, and my mother was a criminal, too busy with her scheming to worry about me. She left for days, sometimes weeks, so I soon got used to being alone. I never had friends. One day, a social worker arrived and took me away from my irresponsible mother to take me to an orphanage. In the beginning, I didn't really care much. In fact, it was the perfect chance to start from scratch and start socializing with the other kids my same age. But I didn't know why. Everything went wrong. Nobody liked me, and they all intimidated me. I would sit on a chair and wouldn't talk to anybody. I was afraid to. I got used to the idea that I wasn't normal and that I didn't fit in anywhere. Suddenly, one day, they told me to pack because I was going to be adopted. I was really surprised. Who was going to adopt a 13-year-old boy? People usually prefer young and cute kids. Plus, I was a weirdo. It was obvious. I was more surprised when they took me in a big, luxurious mansion, more than I'd ever seen. I settled in my room, and some days went by until I finally met my new father. He was a chief scientist in a big laboratory that studied the behavior of a virus. Because of his job, he didn't get to spend much time at home either, and I started to reawaken old ghosts from the past. In order to avoid this, I started showing interest in his investigations, and I even started helping him in his own lab. He returned the favor by explaining to me how everything worked and the amazing destruction power viruses have. Just as him, I started keeping a work journal where I drew sketches and wrote down formulas. All this took up a lot of school time, and when I did go, my classmates treated me as a weirdo. Whenever I was 17, I learned so much about viruses that I decided to start carrying out my own experiments. I used rats and other animals, and usually all tests ended with them dead of the subject. When they died, they emitted high noises, a kind of suffocating, as if their lungs were about to explode. It was an incredible moment. I wondered what sounds humans would make, but each time I talked about this with anybody, they said I was sick and I needed to look for some help. However, I didn't give up. One day, whenever I was with my father at work, I was left alone and took advantage of the situation by filling up a syringe with a very lethal virus. That same night, while everybody was sleeping, I put on my black jacket and blue jeans and went down to the basement. I had my baseball bat, and by coincidence, I found a jar used with rusty nails. I nailed some of them and so created a simple but mortal weapon. In another drawer, I found an old gas mask and some blue wildered glasses. Once I had it all, I went out to the darkest neighborhood in town. I chose a house randomly, an old and ramshackle house, and went inside. It wasn't difficult to end the lives of everyone in there, thanks to my impressive bat, but I saved the last person, a 50-year-old man. I immobilized him and injected him with the virus I had stolen. I waited till I had spread it all over his body. The man barely complained. He was terrified. After a while, he started groaning out loud, groans that sounded like those of the animals, and suddenly he fell to the floor. He was dead, and I couldn't help but smile. I'd finally lived that moment. When I went back home, my father was waiting for me, awake. I decided to tell him what I had done, hoping as a scientist he would share my desire for investigating, but instead he was horrified and wanted to call the police. He looked at me with the same expression of disgust as my classmates. When he grabbed the phone, I took the opportunity to smash his head with the bat. I left running towards the research lab, where I snuck in thanks to the accreditation I had stolen from my father. I grabbed a bag and started to fill it with syringes and viruses samples of all kinds. I had decided to escape, but before doing so, I went around the dirty neighborhood of the town to try out some of the new accomplishments. After that, I needed some refuge, so I went into the woods. After some time walking, I found someone. I tried to sight them in the darkness and saw a boy wearing orange glasses and a muzzle covering his mouth. He was wearing a gray hoodie with dark blue hood, and he had 2 axes with him. I didn't know if he had seen me, so I hid behind a tree. But when I looked up again, he wasn't there anymore. I looked in another direction, and suddenly I saw him face to face, really close to me. "Get out of there. I know you have nothing to hide." It didn't seem like he wanted to attack me, so I went, horrified. I asked who he was, and he replied, "My name is Toby." I wanted to say my name, Cody, but instead something different came out of my mouth. X-Virus. "Nice to meet you, X-Virus. Now come with me." He started walking and I followed him. Without even imagining, I had found a great friend, a new blood brother. One day, my mother was driving me and my younger brother home from a gymnastics meet. Since we went out to eat after it, it was also dark when we finally embarked on our journey home. We were driving down one of the roads to get to our house, which is a secluded branch of a road that veers away from the nearby town. We lived down in the boondocks when I saw what I thought was a little girl curled up on the shoulder of the road. At first, my mom, who was having trouble seeing in the dark, didn't see the little girl, but I insisted I saw her. My mom had a very motherly persona, so she opted to turn the car around to see if the girl needed help. We made a U-turn and circled back to where I thought I saw the girl. When we reached the spot, she was nowhere to be found. My mom wrote it off as me being tired from working so hard, so she made another U-turn to continue on the way home. After about 10 minutes of driving, my little brother had yelled from the car seat, "Mama, the girl!" My mom instinctively stomped on the brakes, assuming someone was running into the road out of her view. When we didn't see anything, she asked him what he meant. He told her that a little girl was sitting on the side of the road and was afraid she was going to get hurt, since he was taught to stay away from the streets. My mom glanced out the side of the mirror, and I craned my neck to look out the rear window. Nothing. After a quiet scolding my brother under her breath for fabricating what I thought I saw, Mom began to drive again. The rest of the 20-minute drive was rather quick. No one talked, and the little girl didn't show up again. When I finally arrived home, my mom shuffled up the stairs to help my brother get ready for bed. I then remembered I forgot my bag in the car, so I turned around in the foyer to go back outside. I walked outside, went to the passenger door, opened it, and reached inside, grabbing my bag. As I ducked out of the car out of habit, I glanced out of the side mirror. When I did, about 15 feet behind me was the girl I saw on the side of the road about a half hour prior, still curled up and hugging her knees. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, so I slammed the car door and bolted to my house. I didn't bother turning around. Still to this day, I try to avoid traveling down our road going outside at night. Homicide Report. Detective McMahon, badge number 1025, August 26, 2014, at 11:34 p.m., 544 Northwest Tarrant Street. One deceased female, age 26, large entry wound to chest, heart removed. Hey Jason, what we got this time? Yeah, it's another one, the CSI officer said, shaking his head. Same MO, chest ripped open, heart removed, human heart from previous deceased person at scene. How many does this make? The detective asked. Are we counting the one at the lake? Jason inquired. No, not yet anyway, replied Detective McMahon. 5 then. But there's no way we can deny that they are at least connected, Jason said to the detective, squinting his eyes. Yeah, I hear ya. But there was no heart present. It's his calling card. There's no way he'd leave out that little detail. This guy's sick and it's ritual. They may be connected, but it may be a copycat. I'm not giving him the credit till I'm sure. The detective pulled out his lucky Zippo, rubbed it with his fingers as he examined the apple engraved in its surface. As he lit his cigarette, he noticed the pale ring around his left ring finger. He took a deep breath, ran his finger through his hair, and exhaled. Near the woods, on an old country road near the outskirts of town, a car pulled to a stop about 20 yards up the road. A young teenage couple seeking reclusion from prying eyes dimmed the lights of the car. Hey, look, at least turn on some music or something before they just start grabbing around, the girl said to the teenage boy as he rolled his eyes and fumbled for the radio. Come on, don't be a sad sport. Make it romantic, she laughed. Oh yeah, he said sarcastically. Real romantic, sneaking off with me, while your boyfriend, my friend, sits at home loving you. We're not supposed to be out here anyway with the curfew and all. Oh, please, that girl died almost a month ago, and I didn't hear you complain the last time, or the time before that, she said as she unbuttoned her shirt. Come on, you know that. The car shook violently as something slammed down onto it. What the hell was that? The boy screamed as he frantically looked around. All he could see was a single black feather floating in the air above the hood. Then suddenly his window burst into shards as he felt two steely, ice-cold hands reach through the window and grasp him, pulling him through the open window, and began tossed into the near tree. His back smashed as he wrapped around it like a rag doll. He lay there motionless as he looked on in terror as a tall, lanky figure with white hair and crystal blue eyes that almost seemed to glow stare at him. He wore no shirt, his skin as grayish-black. He had a skull on his face, the ribcage and bones to match on his chest and arms. They seemed to be painted on. He also had the bones on the outside of his hand and fingers. He wore jeans and an old pair of shoes. The boy felt the most terrible sadness come over him. He lay there hopeless as the figure changed its attention from him to the girl and moved towards the car. Tommy! Tommy, help me! She screamed as the figure jumped onto the hood of the car. The figure smashed out the windshield, reaching inside the car, grabbing the girl and slowly dragging her out of the hood. She didn't fight back. She lay still now. It crouched over her and looked at Tommy while lowering its head. The creature then whispered something in the girl's ear and kissed her on the forehead. The figure started pulling at something at his chest, slowly and maniacally. Tommy could hear disgusting sounds of blood dripping down and flesh rustling around the creature as it seemed to be reaching inside of its own chest. It then pulled out something from himself and laid it on the hood next to the girl. The figure then removed the girl's shirt. "No! Valerie! No!" Tommy used the last of his strength to scream. The figure grinned as he slammed his fist into her chest. He struck her repeatedly as the bone crushed and popped with every strike. She violently shook and coughed up blood as he continued to hit her. Tommy lay motionless. All he could do was shed one tear. The tear rolled down his cheek as he watched the monster begin to rip and tear into the flesh of his bare hands. Finally, he reached his prize and pulled her still beating heart from inside her. He placed her heart inside the wound he had created in his chest, then dug around in his pockets and pulled something out and placed it in his mouth. The creature then began to pull the girl's hair from her head and laid the strands of her hair neatly next to each other. He took the object from his mouth, which appeared to be some sort of needle, and picked up a lock of hair and began to sew his wound shut. Tommy lay silent in terror as he watched the grotesque task begin executing the next practice in precision. He noticed a small movement from the ground near the base of the car. He blinked his eyes to clear out his vision and saw it was a small scruffy dog pouncing around it, wagging its tail. The figure stepped out of the car, knelt down and petted the dog on the head. It spun around and wagged its tail. The figure turned his attention back to Tommy, then walked over and stooped down to his knees near Tommy's head. Tommy could see the horrific detail of the thing's body. The black skin, skull, and bones were all a part of him, not like tattoos or painted on him, but as if it was actually his skin. Tommy could see the crude stitches holding the wound together, made from Valerie's hair. The creature looked down at Tommy and tilted his head inquisitively as he reached out its hand and wiped away from Tommy's tear. Tommy could feel nothing but a horrible, hopeless sadness as he stared into the thing's bright blue eyes. The figure then softly placed his hands on either side of Tommy's face. It then leaned in closer and spoke the words, "Do you value your heart?" Have you ever been influenced by clothing? I don't mean confidence by looks. Have you ever been given more control than ever an item or truth, or just a favorite shirt? Have you ever been influenced in the worst way, by showing the truth? The following is taken directly from the journal entries. The entries were written by a notorious but unknown killer. He is notorious in the means that everyone has seen his work. He is unknown because nobody knows that he has done it. His origin is unusual. No troubles, no evil family, no magic or paranormal forces. His life was chosen by him, and him alone. His identity is also unknown. He will be named from here on as the Hooded Man. April 3rd, 2004. It's been really cold around here. I don't have anything to cover myself. All I have are my t-shirts and jeans. So today I decided to get a jacket. It was just from a local store. Nothing special. It's a black hoodie with a white lining. I think it's pretty cool. And when I tried it on, the attendant said it suits me fine. I said thanks to be polite. Common courtesy is so hard to find. So, I bought it. I haven't taken it off yet. Not only is it warm, but I can finally see myself doing amazing things in it. When I look at the mirror, I smirk. I feel amazing. I can't really explain it, but I like it. I really like it. I feel the need to put my hood up. Something about the hood has a way of masking a person. Even though it shows their face, it hides something. Somewhere. It's really late now. I've been feeling so great all day. Time flies around me. I'll have to explain more tomorrow. April 10th. It's been a hell of a week. I felt so great. I walked the halls like a big shot. I'm sure I looked smug. That's why Jack challenged me. He was so angry. Who never do ignoring an insult was more insulting than responding with shrewd comments about someone's family. He antagonized me. He asked for it. He threw a hard punch, and I stood. It stung harder than before when I actually argued with him. I felt so cool all week. My confidence kept me up. I punched him hard in the stomach, and I lifted him up with an underhook. It felt so good. It really did. My parents are calling. April 14th. Jack still isn't out of the hospital. They said he's in a lot of pain. He spit up a lot of blood. His parents told me over the phone. I reflected on it. on how great it felt when my fist connected, how his cracked scream sounded. "That's good to hear," I said blankly. I didn't care about Jack. I smiled at his pain. I kept staring. I kept staring at my mirror. I'm always wearing my favorite hoodie. It felt so empowering. My friends would laugh at what I'd say. They would compare me to Spider-Man in his black suit. Spider-Man threw his powers away. I didn't plan on doing anything with my source of confidence. April 22nd. Jack has gone to a better place. The words rang in my ear. He's dead. He lost too much blood. His father told me the day I visited that he was losing blood due to personal health conditions. But the way his mother looked at me told me the real story. I killed him. I still remember the satisfaction of hitting him. I never wanted to kill him. I needed to think about what I've done, right? That'll fix my feelings. But what is there to think about? Regret is a foolish emotion. I don't regret it. April 24th. Dad had been avoiding me lately, and Mom just tells me she loves me. They both want me to feel endless guilt, but I won't, or rather, I can't. I can fake it for the public, but the truth is, I'm not sorry. Spider-Man's story is starting to make me think more. But why would a cursed or possessed hoodie land in my possession? Everybody who knew Jack glared at me. Everyone who I would talk to had transferred themselves out of my class or went to a different school. Teachers didn't look at me much, or get on to me if I'm breaking any rule. Today I threw a pencil at my history teacher. It hit his shoulder. He just froze for a second and continued what he was doing. Everyone either hates me and probably wants me dead, or they fear me. My writing is my only comfort I have. I could be at peace and let myself go. April 25th. They provoked me. They threatened me. I had no choice. They would have killed me. My hood protected my face. The knife actually moved from Rob's hands to mine. I didn't mean to. The writing was about a short line at this point. April 30th. 5 days. 5 days being interrogated and sleeping in a cell. They decided I was only defending myself. I can hear Mom and Dad talking. They want me gone. They're both scared. I was just an idiot to think that this jacket of mine was possessing me. It's just a really cool jacket. I love how it looks. I feel like such a badass. I remember how I put the hood up. I put it up when Jack challenged me. I put it up when those guys tried to kill me. I feel no remorse. I feel indifferent. I am in control. I finally come to realize insanity. I wanted to kill them. All of them. I needed only a push and the confidence to fight. I got it. Mom and Dad are irritating me. They are all infuriating me. In this world, there exists a spirit neither male nor female. This spirit is covered with a dark cloth, with a separate white cloth to cover its head. It is said to carry an enormous brown burlap sack, in which it holds its victims. It is said that the second its name has been called out, either directly or indirectly, the person is collected and becomes the property of the spirit. Many of those who have witnessed its appearance have been said to have gone insane and were later found with their eyes gouged out. This spirit is very, very real, and failure to prevent the mention of its name will cause Candlejack to come and whisk you away. A friend of mine showed me how to use Google Maps. I'm sure you've seen it. It lets you use satellite images to look at locations all over the world. A few years ago, I was in a car accident. Since then, I didn't really leave the house often. It's difficult, and the idea of seeing a car drive by me makes me feel lightheaded. I was fascinated by the fact that I could see all over the world, almost like being there. I could virtually walk down the streets, and it almost felt like I was there. I became instantly hooked. It gave me a real eye on the world. I could go to almost any major city, and I did. I'd seen streets in China, Japan, Germany, England. So many places. I'd been gone to tourist attractions like the Great Barrier Reef and Dracula's Castle. My favorite was to go to random places in major cities and see how many people and animals I could find. The faces of the people were always blurred to protect their privacy, but it was still enjoyable to see them out there, enjoying their life, walking like it was no big deal. She must have had a good taste, I laughed. I zoomed in closer and noticed the gray bag she carried on a gray and purple shoulder strap. She was walking in a relaxed manner, one hand trailing the wall behind her. I bet if I could have seen her face, I would see that she was smiling. I began to feel a little sad. I let my hand fall into the arms of my wheelchair and looked at her for a minute more. I wished that I could have been there, walking so carefree with her. That wouldn't happen, though, until I died. I was stuck in that wheelchair. I sighed and zoomed out of Tokyo. Enough of this for tonight. I turned off the computer and went back to bed. I got up early and decided to look around Paris. Paris was always fun. I liked the look of the city, which of all the old beautiful buildings and so many people to watch. I randomly zoomed to an area and saw a street lined with old brick buildings, a few small shops and an old tan brick church. Ahead was an intersection and dozens of people walking by. A balding businessman walked quickly past, looking back at an older woman, hair covering his scarf, carrying a large purse. A curvy woman in black pants that were too tight stared into a store window, and two women led a group of small children around the corner. I spun the view around a few times, and then I saw something peculiar. Sitting on the bench at a bus stop were two people. One of them was a young woman with her feet stuck in front of her in a relaxed manner. She was wearing a pair of red sneakers like my own. I was startled for a moment as I noticed the black pants, white t-shirt, and black hooded jacket. Her dark brown hair was tied loosely behind her head. A gray bag sat on the bench beside her, the shoulder strap hooked over her shoulder. This is crazy, I thought. It can't possibly be the same woman. This is a different country, different continent. How could it be her? This was stupid. It wasn't if they were live photographers. They were taken ahead of time and then stored. It's not like she could be at two places at once. She could just be a traveler. Besides, without seeing her face, it was impossible to tell if it was the same person. Brown hair was probably the most common hair color in the world. Those red sneakers was something I purchased online. I'm sure a million other people did too. I shook my head and went back to fix some lunch. When I got back online, I decided to look at Berlin. I picked a random street as usual. It looked pretty empty. There were brick buildings lining the streets along more like factories than anything else. There were also empty lots, full of long grass and piled gravel. There wasn't much to see at all, really. There was a line of motorbikes and a car with two German flags striking up from it. After more searching, I found one kid. He looked like he was dressed for school, a jacket thrown over his bag. He was intently looking at some kind of mobile device. I was disappointed. I started to leave, but then I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to view, and there they were, those damned red sneakers. She was standing up on the street corner next to some kind of signpost. She had a hand on the post looking down at the street, as if she was waiting to cross the street. I stared in shock. How could she be there too? Even if she was traveling, there's no way I could find her every time. Even finding her in Paris would have been one heck of a coincidence. But this was crazy. Was this some kind of joke? Had Google decided to play a prank on its users that use their products so much? It had to have been a great joke. I did a quick search looking for a note about a woman that shows up like Waldo. There was nothing. I looked through articles on strange things you can see on Google Maps, but none of them mentioned the woman that travels the world with you. This was crazy. Had my self-imposed isolation driven me that mad? Had I become so lonely that I created a hallucination for myself? Leaving the Berlin image on the screen, I sent a text to my friend, asking him to look at the location. I asked him and he saw the same woman. Then I waited, hands sweating, heart thumping in my chest. I jumped when my phone beeped with a return text message 10 minutes later. The text read, "I see the lady you're talking about in Berlin. I didn't see your face in Paris or Tokyo. Is this some kind of game or what? Are you okay?" I didn't respond. Instead of returning to the locations of Tokyo and Paris, there she was. She was there, but it was different. She no longer sat on the bus stop bench in Paris. She was standing in front of it, looking for something in her bag. In Tokyo, she was blocks away, squatting down to pet that calico cat. I shivered. Who was she? What was happening? I switched the map to Brussels, another city street. They were lined with old-looking buildings, with shops on the ground level, and what I guess were apartments above. I quickly scanned the streets. They were empty, other than a stocky woman in a bright blue sweater. Then a second sweep. She wasn't there. I sighed in relief. I couldn't believe what I was getting so worked up about. It was ridiculous. It was nothing but I stopped. My eyes froze on the screen. There was a building at the point and fork in the road, white and a black ironwork framed balcony jolting in the second floor. I hadn't seen her, as I had been looking at the sidewalks. There she stood, standing on the balcony, her head tilted in a direction of the camera, almost like she was coiling, looking towards me. My breath became caught in my throat. I switched to Sydney. She was leaning against the wall inside the doorway of a bright blue Carrick's Pharmacy building. London showed her getting ready to step into a red double-decker bus. Her head turned to look over her shoulder. She was everywhere I looked. She stood on a brick sidewalk on a bridge in Venice. She walked across a yellow board crosswalk in Zurich. And in Hong Kong, she stood between a Wing Lung bank and a McDonald's adjusting the strap in her bag. Each picture, she came closer and closer to looking directly at me with her blurred-out face. My heart felt like a terrified bird, slamming around against my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't call the police. Should I send screenshots to Google? I clenched my fist tightly and closed my eyes. Who was she? Was she following me? Was I following her? I wish I could see the expression on her face. Know what she saw when she looked back at me. I wanted to get out of this chair and run. Why is it that the only thing that made me feel free again was the thing that made me feel even more trapped? I had to know. I typed the name of the town and zoomed in across random streets. It was a couple of miles from my house. The gates to the city park were shown in the clarity of daylight, despite it being night here. There she was. There she was. She was only a few miles from my house, standing under the ironwork arch that stated the name of the park. She looked directly at the camera, directly at me. I felt like I might throw up. She was near me, and she was watching me. She was coming for me. What did she want? I typed the name of the apartment complex where I live. I could see the outside of the building. The parking lot was full of cars, and there were a few blurred-out children on the playground. I searched everywhere for her. She wasn't in the parking lot or on the sidewalks, not hiding behind the buildings or standing in the playground. I even scanned each of the cars behind the bushes and each of the blurred windows. She wasn't there. I curled tightly around myself, and I laid my head on my desk. This place was safe. I didn't leave the apartment anyway. I would never use Google Maps again. I would never see her again. She could stay at the park for all I cared for. I smiled to myself, and I was surprised to find a tear slipping down my face. I'm safe, I said to myself in a whisper. It felt good to hear it out loud. I'm safe. As I said it, there was a knock at the door. A chill ran down my spine. I had a camera hooked to my computer that showed who it was at my front door, which made it easier for me with my mobility issues. I slowly reached for the control to show myself who was outside, but my hand trembled furiously. As I touched the control, I realized my mistake. The last of the Google images that I'd seen had only shown the outside of the building. Just the outside. I looked at the screen and saw the woman in a white t-shirt, black pants, and black hooded jacket, carrying a gray bag with a purple and gray strapped shoulder strap. Of course, there were those red sneakers. She looked directly at the camera, her face still a complete blur. As I tried to stifle a scream, she raised a hand and knocked loudly on my front door. During the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, I had a job at a local cinema. I'm 26 years old now and, well, on my way to other, more important things in my life. But this is the first time I've told this story. Mind you, the theater was very small since it was located in a small town where I grew up, North English, Iowa, population just over 1,000. This made things easier for me since one of the jobs I had to do sometimes was clean up the theaters after each film was over. Unlike some cinemas in bigger areas that have upwards of 20 theaters, this one only had 5. The cinema was almost perfectly symmetrical. Once you give your tickets to the ticket taker, another job I was given sometimes, the concession stand is in front of you. There's a hallway to the left, south hallway, and another to the right, north hallway. The hallway to the left had 3 theaters. Once you walk down the hallway, Theater 1 is on your left, Theater 2 is on your right, and Theater 3 is just straight ahead. The hallway to the right, on the other hand, just had 2 theaters, Theater 4 on your left and Theater 5 on your right. Instead of a third theater directly ahead of the south hallway, there was nothing but a giant Pepsi advertisement poster stretching from the ceiling all the way to the floor. The advertisement looked like it had hung there for quite some time. The blue and red colors had seemingly faded significantly, and everything about it just kind of had that old, for lack of a better word, look to it. It was a blue poster dominated by a huge image of a bottle of a Pepsi. The word Pepsi was on the top, and the bottom had a slogan that I'd never seen anywhere else. Nothing else is a Pepsi. I never really thought much of it. It's a small town and there aren't going to be a ton of moviegoers, so why deal with the upkeep cost of a 6th theater when it probably wouldn't turn any profit? I'm sure the owner of the theater had some economic reason behind their decision. One slow day at work, I was staring aimlessly at the poster, waiting for something to do when I noticed a small bulge on the right side of it. It was barely noticeable. Something you almost had to look for in order to see. But for the first time since I had started working at the theater, it crossed my mind that something other than just a blank wall may in fact be behind the poster. I went over and felt the small indentation, and, to my amazement, it felt like a doorknob. Not just any doorknob. The type of doorknob on the doors to the other 5 theaters. I pulled back the poster and looked behind it, and, sure enough, there was a door. Tons of questions raced through my mind, but I eventually concluded that neglecting to use the theater was probably just an economic-based decision, and I had figured the door was locked, so I didn't get to go see inside. Still, my curiosity wouldn't go away. Why had I never heard of this? Why was the door covered with a poster? Did the door even lead to a 6th theater? I decided to ask the owner, Kevin. Kevin was 12 years older than me, about 30 at the time, and also worked at the cinema when he was in high school. His father used to own the cinema, but it had been passed down to Kevin once he graduated from college. Nothing, just the wall, he responded hastily when I asked him what was behind the Pepsi poster. Kevin, I saw the door. He looked at me for a couple of seconds and let out a sigh. Okay, come over here, he said as he led me away from a crowd of people. You can never tell this story to any of our customers. Got it? Yeah, sure. Just tell me what happened, I asked anxiously. He proceeded to tell me about one particular night, the weekend after Thanksgiving when he was a senior in high school. Toy Story had come out a few weeks earlier, and it was being shown in Theater 6 that night. Oddly enough, I'd never seen Toy Story. I was 5, almost 6, when it came out, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only one from my generation who never went to go see it. I was supposed to go one night with a group of friends from kindergarten and their parents, but I was sick with the flu, and my parents wouldn't let me go. Anyway, something apparently went wrong that night. Kevin told me about how he remembered the faces of the kids that went out of the theater, saying they appeared to be in somewhat of a trance-like state, and were all white like ghosts. He said that he overheard some of the parents making comments like, I thought this was supposed to be a kids' movie, and saying other things along those lines. It was the last showing of the night in Theater 6, and it was a good thing. Some of the kids and parents had torn all the cotton out of some of the seats and thrown things at the cinema, damaging it. They closed the theater for the next few days, and there were a lot of repairs to be done for it, to be suitable for another showing anytime soon. However, they never got around to fixing it, and decided to shut down for good given what happened in North England soon after. Over the next couple of weeks, Kevin told me there was a rash of child disappearances throughout the area. Their names and pictures were in the paper, and I just about lost my lunch when I saw who they were, Kevin explained. I recognized pretty much every kid's face, he said. They were the ones to come out of the theater that night. According to Kevin, none of the kids were ever found, dead or alive. Nice story, bro, I chuckled. Now tell me what really happened. Don't believe me? I don't blame you, said Kevin. But come take a look at this. He proceeded to take me to his office and pull a web page on his computer. He showed me a picture of a young blonde girl with dark brown eyes, about upper elementary age. Under the picture, the page read, Karen Wilson, date of birth, August 11th, 1985. Hometown, North English, Iowa. Last seen, November 29th, 1995. Status, still missing. This is a database I found online that tracks missing kids, Kevin told me as he showed me how he filtered the results on the site, North English for the town, 1995 for the year. He clicked the next button to reveal a picture of a blonde-haired girl. This one was a little bit younger. Leah Hollinger, date of birth, February 1st, 1988. Hometown, North English, Iowa. Last seen, November 29th, 1995. Status, still missing. When Kevin clicked the next button again, I froze. This face, I recognized. Kyle Sheely, date of birth, March 18th, 1990. Hometown, North English, Iowa. Last seen, November 30th, 1995. Status, still missing. Kyle was one of the friends I was planning on seeing Toy Story with. My parents told me he had to move schools, and as a kindergartner at the time, I never second-guessed anything they said. Then my stomach dropped. It finally hit me. Jeff, Justin, and Aaron, the other 3 kids who went to see Toy Story that night, had also moved away. As Kevin scrolled through the other missing kids, 12 in total, there they were. Jeffrey Bates, date of birth, October 5th, 1989, hometown, North English, Iowa. Last seen, December 2nd, 1995. Status, still missing. Justin Weber, date of birth, June 13th, 1990. Hometown, North English, Iowa. Last seen, December 7th, 1995. Status, still missing. Aaron McPhee, date of birth, April 3rd, 1990. Hometown, North English, Iowa. Last seen, December 8th, 1995. Status, still missing. Panic set in. Everything inside me felt cold. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I ran to the bathroom certain that I was about to get sick. I ended up being able to calm myself down, but I didn't sleep that much for the next few nights. About a week later, I still couldn't get it out of my mind. It was a busy night at work, as it was the opening weekend of the 5th Harry Potter movie, and I decided I was going to do it. I was going to enter Theater 6. They had a few extra workers staffed to clean up the theaters after the last Harry Potter showing was over, but only 5 minutes into the cleanup, I told them to all go home and that I was going to take care of the rest. They all thanked me, packed up, and went home for the night. My night, however, was just beginning. Once I finished cleaning up Theater 2, where Harry Potter was being shown, I headed over towards the north hallway and started down the Pepsi poster. After checking to make sure nobody else was inside, I reached into my pocket to grab the paperclip I bought to pick the lock. Picking locks wasn't anything new to me. When you grow up in a small town like North English, you and your buddies are always looking for something to do, and, well, I guess that's a story for a different time. After some fidgeting around, it worked. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, and opened the door. Other than getting hit with a gust of cold air, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Instead of smelling like a weird mixture of popcorn and lemon-scented cleaner, like the other theaters, this one had, as you would expect, a damp, musty smell. Mice and rats had clearly been in the theater based on the smell, which kind of grossed me out since people just across the hallway watched movies, ate popcorn, and drank soda every night. and I was one of the people in charge of keeping the place clean. I turned on my flashlight, and sure enough, the theater was a mess. The screen was still cracked from having assorted objects thrown at it that night, just like Kevin had told me. As far as the seats, they were still torn up. However, I couldn't tell if the majority of them were destroyed by those moviegoers or by mice and rats. I still had goosebumps and was a little freaked out, but after some inspection of the theater, I didn't find anything overly terrifying. I decided to walk up to the top of the steps and check out the control booth. It looked like the other 5 control booths. Clearly, we hadn't made any renovations to any of them since the mid-90s or before. I always thought the technology seemed a little outdated in the theater, and this was pretty much confirmed it. After looking around the cobwebbed, riddled sound and light controls, I noticed to my horror a roll of film labeled Toy Story. Another roll of the film, this one unmarked, was on the reel. The one hide and seek, aka one-man tag, is a ritual from conducting the dead. The spirits which are wandering restlessly on the earth are always looking for bodies to possess. In this ritual, you are summoned such a spirit by offering it a doll instead of a human body. Warning: if you have psychic abilities, you may feel unwell or be prone to accidents during the ritual. Things you will need: 1 stuffed doll. It must have limbs. Rice enough to stuff the doll full. 1 needle and 1 crimson thread. 1 pair of nail clippers. 1 sharp-edged tool such as a knife, glass shard, or scissors. 1 cup of salt water. Natural salt would be best. A bathroom with a bathtub in some form of container. A hiding place, preferably a room purified by incense and otifa. There must be a TV in there. Preparations: take out whatever the doll was stuffed with. Once all the stuffing is removed, restuff it with rice. Clip off all the pieces of your nails and put them inside the doll. Screw up the opening of the crimson thread. While you are finished sewing, tie up the doll and the rest of the thread. Go to the bathroom and fill your bathtub with water. Return to your hiding place and put the cup of salt water on the ground. How to do it: give a name to your doll. The name can be any but your own. When the time is 3 a.m., say, "Your name is the first it" to the doll 3 times. Go to the bathroom and put the doll into the water-filled bathtub. Turn off all the lights in your house and go to a hiding place and switch on the TV. After counting to 10 with your eyes closed, return to the bathroom with the edge tool in your hand. Go to the bathtub and say to the doll, "I have found you," the doll's name. Stab the doll with the edge tool. Say, "You are the next it," the doll's name. As you take the doll out of the tub and leave it on the counter of the bathroom. As soon as you put the doll down, run back to your hiding place and hide. How to finish: pour half of the cup of salt water into your mouth. Do not drink it. Keep it in there. Get out of your hiding place and start looking for the doll. The doll is not necessarily in the bathroom. Whatever happens, do not spit the salt water. Whenever you find the doll, pour the rest of the salt water in the cup over it. Then spit out the salt water in your mouth onto it as well. Say, "I win," 3 times. This is supposed to end the ritual. After this, make sure you dry the doll, burn, and discard it later. Most important, do not stop this ritual halfway. You must do it through the end. This is a dangerous ritual, and I will not be responsible for whatever happens to you if you try. Other things to keep in mind: do not leave your house until you have done the finishing ritual. You must try to turn off every single light in your house when told to do so. You must keep quiet while hiding. You do not need to put the salt water in your mouth during the beginning. You only need to do it during the finishing ritual. Remember, if you are living with someone, you might put them in danger too. Keep the ritual game under 2 hours, or else the spirit will be too strong to remove. For safety reasons, it might be best to keep all the doors in your house unlocked, including your front door. As well, have friends close by, so that they can come and help you at a moment's notice. If you ever need them, keep a mobile close at hand. It would be a good idea too. Notes: the rice represents innards, and also had the road to attract spirits. 2. The crimson thread represents a blood vessel. It seals the spirits up inside the doll. 3. By cutting the thread off, you break the seal and release the spirits you have trapped. 4. If you go out your hiding place without salt water, you may encounter something wandering around in your house, which may harm you in some way. The way to feel the pressure of something wandering around is watching whatever happens to the TV. Nothing really happens, but it gives you some ideas anyway. You can hear the changes in the sound. It becomes unsteady, repeats itself like a broken record, and becomes warped towards the end. I'm sure most of you have heard Spongebob Squarepants. It is a TV show on Nickelodeon that shows a sponge named SpongeBob, and it focuses on his adventures with his friends. However, there is one lost episode that never made it to the series. It was February 2008. It was almost my brother's birthday. My dad told me to go to Walmart to find a gift for him, and I nodded. I was later in the toy section, and I was about to buy him a toy robot when I felt something on the front of my foot. It was a VHS tape, and it had no label like most VHS tapes did. It was purple. I then got the toy robot and the VHS tape. I asked the clerk where the tape came from, and he told me that it comes from the Nickelodeon studios, because a guy whose name will not be revealed to you took a tape of one of their unaired SpongeBob episodes and dropped it on the floor in one section. He then told me to take the VHS tape for free, but I had to pay for the toy robot. So I paid for the toy robot and took the VHS tape home without paying for it. I put the tape to my new VCR I got for Christmas of 2017, and the tape started. The quality was surprisingly perfect. There were no flaws with it. What's odd is the intro didn't start. It just skipped to the episode. The title card was just a black background with the words written in red, Plankton Knows. I was confused by the title. What does Plankton know? The title card was only up for a few milliseconds before it jumped to the episode. The episode was a shot of Plankton, but he looked like he was created poorly using Blender. His laughing was no better. It sounded very messed up and demonic. The camera was jumping straight to areas near him. The screen was also changing colors, causing a seizure. After a good 9 seconds of this, the camera jumped into Plankton's mouth, and his laughing then faded out. The rest of the tape after that was just a black screen, and it only lasted for 4 seconds before the tape ended without the usual ending credits. I was totally confused and shocked at what I saw. Normally a SpongeBob episode is 11 minutes long, but this was only for 15 seconds. I took the tape out of the VCR and put it in the basement, where it remains to this day. I then realized that the episode made its way into the air in 2007, and it was taken off after the broadcast back then, and it had never aired again. This means that the guy found the tape in 2007 and dropped it in one of the Walmart sections. I had a nightmare about this messed up laughter, and I could not sleep for months. At no point during the night was she more than half a mile from the police station, but the park was thinly lit, and the road snaked through the forest in both directions. I took a personal interest in her story after I learned how badly her body had been mutilated. The details continued to flood in, and I'm still working to tease apart the evidence. What is undeniably clear is that a killer still roams free. He's out there somewhere, and he's stalking new victims in the neighborhoods that I call home. For this reason, I can for now only insinuate many of the things that I know. To reveal certain details would be to paint a target on my back, and so they cannot be shared here. That's what's said. Here are the facts as I understand them about the night that Smiling Jane Doe died. They named her that because her lips had been peeled away with a blade. It was her bared teeth glistening like white porcelain in the dawn's light that first drew the attention of the jogger who discovered her body. The park where she died is a famous one, and Smiling Jane Doe was not the first woman to be murdered there. I fear putting too fine a point on the location of this place, so let me just say that this park is located inside the national's capital. You have likely heard the park's name before. Locals will be glad to tell you about the unlit roads wind deceptively through the wilderness here, and how those same roads become especially treacherous at night. They might also mention how the bridges arc high above the low roads beneath them. These are the sort of bridges that make push and fall murders appear neatly like suicides. Smiling Jane Doe was from out of town. She was likely in the city that weekend just to take in the sights. No abandoned car was ever found that could be tied to hers. If at some point she had been carrying a purse or wallet with ID inside, then it seems that the killer took the clue to her identity with him. We can't yet guess how or why she had traveled in the district, or where it was that Jane called home before she died. It's possible that she was hitchhiking and found herself here entirely by chance. For instance, Jane could have been visiting this place deliberately. Maybe she traveled here with a happier purpose in mind for herself, and she simply remained outside a little too late after dark. Here are the events of the night that are plainly and accurately as described them. Smiling Jane Doe tried to flag down a car that was traveling through the park approximately 10:40 p.m. The car's driver was a female in her late 30s, and this was crucial witness, unfortunately, continued down the road without stopping her vehicle. The driver would state later that she barely saw Smiling Jane Doe there in the darkness, and did not notice her until the victim was close enough to narrowly avoid being hit by the car. In the particular park, and especially at that time of night, can be dodged too harshly for refusing to stop for strangers. After all, carjackings sometimes begin with the false premise of a woman in need of help. Our witness driving past was a mother of 3 young children. I held no ill will against her for making her choice. As the car disappeared around the bend in the road, Smiling Jane Doe fled into a thickly wooded forest of the park. She was trying to lose her attacker, and then dribbled trails of blood across the road indicating that her pursuer had already made some progress in causing her harm. If she had pressed a little further into the woods, she might have been caught in the light of a consulate building on the far side of the park. There were security personnel there, and they were surely keeping watch all night. That could have saved her easily, and she could have made it far enough to be seen. Unfortunately, at some point, Jane Doe double-checked back the way she came. I believe she did so in an attempt to lose her pursuer. The night would turn to be a litany of heartbreaking moments in this way. Jane Doe came so close to salvation more than a dozen times, but a split-second decision was rarely in the wisest ones. This is especially true when someone is in mortal terror. Smiling Jane Doe squandered her chances to survive, and each time she did not realize what she had done. Any one of us might have suffered precisely the same streak of bad luck, and especially on a night like that. She found more winding roads as she pressed through the trees, but she could not guess where she was now stood in the relation of the rest of the twisting side roads in the park. Jane followed the path of one of the park's elevated bridges. As I mentioned before, these bridges loom fatally tall over the ground beneath them. They're all the kind of structures that make murders look like accidents or suicides. It was at this point that Jane spotted an ambulance speeding over the bridge from the opposite direction. She attempted to make the vehicle stop, but the ambulance was already responding to a critical situation on the northwest side of the city. It continued on without her, and would soon arrive at the scene of another gruesome homicide. I believe, in fact, that Smiling Jane Doe's killer had 2 victims that night, but the details of his earlier murder are a story for another time. For now, I intend to honor Jane Doe by somberly describing the facts of her death alone. She was alone on the bridge once more as the ambulance sped away. I believe that Smiling Jane Doe then saw her killer approaching from the shadows. She likely considered jumping from the bridge, hoping perhaps to end an awful pursuit once and for all by plunging to her death. This assumption is supported by the blood and bloody footprints that were found on the bridge's upper railing. Trace evidence suggests that she decided at the last moment against sleeping. She continued on that footfalls that indicated a sprint. She was fleeing down the road. At this point, it bears mention that Smiling Jane Doe was indeed barefoot, and that she was bleeding from her feet due to the loss of her shoes. I believe that an unknown killer confiscated Jane's footwear simply to torment her. Evidence indicated that she did a great many things that night which were intended to prolonging the chase of the human quarry. I believe that our killer caught up to Jane Doe several times before she reached the roadblock. He would injure Jane in a new way each time, or else do something that restricted her movement on foot. This is why he took her shoes. He let Smiling Jane Doe continue attempting to flee at least 4 separate times. It sickens me to this day to consider it. The DNA evidence collected from Jane Doe's body indicates that she met 2 distinct alliances before her death. It was my theory after fleeing from the bridge, Jane Doe found a pedestrian walking along the dark road in the opposite direction. I suspect that he was moving up the road and towards the bridge when she found him. Jane Doe must have begged him for help, and I can only imagine the horror that she felt to learn that the pedestrian was in fact an accomplice of the killing. From the psychological profile, I feel confined for the second man toyed with the Smiling Jane Doe revealing that he understood exactly what kind of peril she was in. I believe that he restrained Jane, though, and allowed the killer to catch up to her once again, at his leisure. It was at this point that our killer most likely carved out her eyes. Police reports indicate that exhausted Rhodes flare were found on the side of each road from where the mutilated smiling of Jane Doe likely began. This would imply that the killer and his accomplice built a fake roadblock, possibly in plausible imitation of a city-authorized detour that was preventing traffic from flowing naturally through the park. In doing so, they ensured that no witnesses would enter the road, where they would likely torment Jane in her last moments. The spirals and aimlessness trails of blood at this location implied that our killers allowed Jane to continue trying to flee from them. They let her keep attempting to save her own life for most of another hour. Now binding, Jane could not navigate the dense underforest and trees. If by some chance she managed to wander too far up or down the long roadway, it would be a simple matter for either the killer or his accomplice to shove her back towards the center of this sick arena. On the night that I learned the most of these details, I remember praying that there was nothing more to be discovered. I asked God for my research to prove that she simply bled to death there. It would mean at least that Jane experienced no more fear, and that she felt nothing when the cut away from her skin from her face. The coroner's report would grant me no such mercy. However, smiling Jane Doe was given drugs to keep her awake. Her mind likely understood that bore witness to those last moments of her life even more vividly than the killer himself came to claim to remember them. No family ever came forward to claim smiling Jane Doe. How could anyone have guessed that their daughter had ended up this way? If you were told, could you even accept it? I went to see her in the city morgue before she was incinerated. Ever since then, I would work daily with investigators to bring her killer to justice. What was done to her cannot go unanswered. The details I have excluded have been there to include deliberately. This has been done to protect the dignity of the dead. There is more yet besides the remains unknown, even to me. Let it be known, I have absolutely no plan to take my own life. I do not intend to die in a certain park that will not be named, but can certainly be guessed. If I am found dead in a particular park, then that means that the killer has learned something about me before I was able to learn something about him. I don't intend for that to happen, though. I will do my best to outwit him. There are far too many unhappy ghosts in that strange patch of the wilderness already, and I do not wish to join them. By the grace of God, may my work help smiling Jane Doe find peace. Have you ever heard of an old game called The Theater? Yeah, didn't think so. Probably because many say it doesn't even exist. You see, The Theater was an old game released around the same time as Doom. Today, if you even find it, it's only available on crappy bootleg CD-ROMs, which, more often than not, don't even actually contain the game. The actual legitimate copies that they say were released back in the day feature a blank cover with nothing but the spirit of what has since been named the Theater Taker. He is a simply porn-draw, pixelated, bald Caucasian man with large red lips wearing a red vest over a white shirt and black pants. He's completely expressionless, though some say if you smash the disc, his face is shown as angry the next time you look at the cover. Though, this is just dismissed as an urban legend. What is peculiar about the theater, though, is that there are no developers' names on the jewel case, nor the game description on the back. It is simply the ticket taker, on a white background on both sides. The game was initially known for its inability to install correctly. The installation process immediately locks up the computer when the user reaches the licensing agreement. Also, strange about the licensing agreement for the theater is whenever the developing studio is supposed to be named, the text is simply a blank line. Anyway, most people who have claimed to own one of the original CDs say that they figured out how to install the game by simply rebooting their computer on the licensing agreement with the disc still inside. Then they are prompted to press I agree on startup. Then they continue with the installation. If a player supposedly manages to find what they believe to be a working copy, they have said that the installer window will freeze and stop responding before you click for the first next. But they do also say that the PCs do not lock up, and it is only the installer that freezes. It is unknown if the actual copies are fakes, but it's widely thought that they were the working copies, or just draw internet attention with no proof of installation effects. Upon proper installation, the game then starts out without any introduction besides the main menu, and then the simple spirit of the movie theater exterior on the empty city street. The title fades, and then the 3 menu buttons: New Game, Load, Options. Selecting Options immediately crashes the game to the desktop. Load is said not to function at all, even if you did have a saved game. Nothing happens when you press it. Thus, New Game it is, into the working menu option. Once it is selected, you're the first-person view. You are standing in an empty movie theater lobby, with the exception of the ticket taker, standing in front of a dark hallway which one can only assume leads to the theaters themselves. There's nothing to do but look at the poorly drawn, mostly illegible movie posters or approach the ticket taker. Once the player moves towards the ticket taker, a very low-quality sound clip plays saying, "Thank you, please enjoy the movie," along with a speech box saying the same thing. You then walk into the hallway and screen fades to black, and you're back into the empty lobby, and you do the exact same thing again and again and again. While this may sound like a really horrible game, a number of peculiar things occur as you continue to play it. The number of times you had to continue in the hallway after giving your ticket to the ticket taker before strange events happens is unknown. Most stated it's completely random and could take anywhere from the first playthrough to the 400th. What happens though has deeply disturbed some players. The first occurrence is when the player fades back in after walking into the hallway. This time they will notice the ticket taker is completely absent. The player then, without any other option, decides to walk into the dark hallway. The sound clip and text mentioned previously is still playing in the absence of the ticket taker, but when the player walks in the hallway, the screen does not fade out. It goes pitch black as they walk deeper into the hall, but the player's footsteps sounds clip is still playing as they continue to push the up button on the keyboard. Those claiming to have played the original game report they felt extremely uncomfortable walking down the hallway, anticipating the whole way something horrible happening. Well, eventually the players are unable to move forward. There is nothing for a few moments before a strange sprite that is described as a ticket taker, but a swirl of a face, appears and stands before the player. The original players of the game say the bodies immediately freeze up and their stomachs churn as they saw the sprite, which had been approximately named Swirly Head Man. Nothing happens as a Swirly Head Man stands before them. Then suddenly a piercing scream plays as it glitches out. This lasts for a few minutes, with the screeching being continuous. Then the players abruptly return to the lobby with all the sounds and graphics being as they used to be. The game continues normally for the next couple of cycles of entering the hallway, with a couple of original players claiming that the swirly head man would briefly appear and disappear at the corner of the screen as a brisk yelp sound effect plays. Then, at some point, after meeting the swirly head man, the player sees the ticket taker pacing back and forth. Though there is no walking animation, the sprite's limbs are completely stacked, so he just hops up and down as a substitute, with his eyes being wide and his mouth open to simulate a worried facial expression. Some players note that the movie posters have been replaced with the image of Swirly Man, which causes them to immediately turn their character's head away from the posters and approach the ticket taker. Then another, different, low-quality sound clip plays, but the screech box contains nothing but corrupt characters, whatever text would have been there in the box to become illegible. Due to the extreme low quality of the sound, it is debated by players what exactly the ticket taker says at this point, though it is widely agreed that he says, "Never reach the other levels." Then the screen fades out once again and returns to the player back to where it was standing point in the lobby. But the ticket taker is gone and the hallway is blocked by a large brick wall sprite. Touching the brick wall will immediately crash the game, and that's all there is to it. No one knows what the other levels are or how to gain access to them, nor is it known why the swirly hit man causes such accurate fear in those who have seen him in the game. All the original copies of the theater have either been destroyed or lost. But the creepiest part is the fact that the original players of the game claim to occasionally see a brief glimpse of the swirly head man out of the corner of their eyes. It's not something whispered about in certain circles. It's not something that comes in a plain-looking jewel case. It's not a nameless, untraceable developer. And it's not something supernatural. The game in question is indeed called The Theater. It was developed by a company called Saldea Software. I'm fairly certain it's an English company, despite the Spanish name. As far as I know, all they made were learning softwares. I have a math suit for them somewhere around here. So The Theater was probably meant to be some sort of eight-dimensional game. The game was obviously never finished, probably from lack of funding or the whole company going under. The description in the story is actually pretty accurate. It's a first-person perspective with flat sprites in a 3D-ish environment and glitchy as hell. The ticket taker has an egg-shaped body, and one of the hands is huge and misshapen. I think to look like he's reaching toward you for a ticket. The description of the swirly hand man is also accurate, just a glitched version of the ticket taker. But I saw a few people saying that he looks like a Gygus. That's not the case. The features of the face are just swirled, and are red because the lips are gigantic. I have absolutely no idea why this has happened. While there are a few character sprites in the game's resources, this isn't one of them. Oh, and just to clarify, the sprite is a bit creepy. That's all. It's not terrifying, it's never filled me with a sense of dread, it's just a bit creepy. The game plays pretty much exactly as stated in the story, so accurately, in fact, that I think the author just downloaded it somewhere and decided to make a scary story of his experiences. I'll admit that some of the things in here can be pretty unsettling, but not OMG crap your pants scary. Like I said, this game is unfinished and pretty glitchy. I think the idea is to select a movie from the posters on the wall, enter the theater and play a minigame. The minigames are glitchy and missing resources, to the point where you being mostly unplayable, but there doesn't seem to be a time limit on any of them, so you just plow through until you've done something right enough times to bump into the lobby, which describes the story and what happens. If you didn't select a movie, you'll be allowed to enter the theater, but since your parameter of which game to load hasn't been set, you'll just be bumped back into the lobby. Here's where it gets a bit weird. If you continue to enter the theater without choosing a movie, odd, sometimes creepy things will happen. I'm not sure why, but if I were to make an educational guess, it would be that glitching past the minigames would cause variables to reach values that they weren't meant to, resulting in things appearing that they shouldn't, or, the game to just glitch to hell and back. It's been years, but here are some of the weird effects that I can remember. The swirly hand man, movie posters appearing out of frame, textures changing colors, legitimate disturbing audio issues, other characters, other areas. The last two are obviously the most interesting ones, because you'll spawn in a small room with the black floor and green walls, which will crash the game if touched. Sometimes you'll appear in a smaller room with a lobby with a concession stand. Kind of. There's a woman behind the counter with an incredibly poor and drawn popcorn machine and a soda fountain. But if it's all just an image on the wall, it's basically just a huge yellow concession stand mural. I don't remember if you can interact with it or not. The other characters that appear worth talking about is a guy in a brown jacket who appears on the sidewalk outside the lobby. Looking back, I don't think the story mentioned this, but to the left to where you start off at the wall is a row of glass doors looking out and onto the streets outside the theater. If you glitch past the mini games enough, a man in a weird looking jacket, I think it's supposed to be tweed, it's a mess, with a huge smile on his face, will just go on the other side of the doors, staring at you. I mean, a huge smile, like Freaky Fred or Spark Brussel. Google image if you want that image in your mind. Actually, since he had the same body shape as the ticket taker, he looks a bit more like the mayor from Nightmare Before Christmas. His smile isn't creepy though, he's just broad. What is creepy are his eyes. While the ticket taker, Ashy Trey, and other sprites will always face you, the smiling guy is anchored in place like one of the walls. His eyes, however, are always staring at you. Just sitting there, just thinking about him gives me the chills. Okay. Well, there's nothing utterly scary or supernatural about the game itself. That's one thing I will admit that legitimately scares me, like a porcelain doll. That's pretty much all there is to the theater. If you can find it somewhere, I'd recommend downloading it just to see what it's like. Oh, one thing I'd forgotten. As stated in the story, getting the thing to run is, to say the least, difficult. I think someone got a hold of all the code and resources and just compiled it and added their own installer or something. Again, there's nothing paranormal about the installation. It just doesn't work well. There's a reason why I won't go to Mockingbird Park. Not just 'cause it's creepy, not just 'cause it's dark. There are twisty spine trees, there are weeds and neglect, but worse than all that is the mocking effect. As you walk in the park's path, you'll hear a faint echo. Footfalls. Your own? The dim and grim ghetto, coming closer and closer as if someone's there. You whirl and see no one, just a fog on the air. So you whistle. It whistles. You cough, and it coughs. Then from the murky mists, a gray shadow breaks off. It's your height and your size and your very same shape. And then it's upon you. No time to escape. You suck in cold air, and then, poof, it moves through you. You laugh at yourself. A shadow can't chew you. But you turn and see someone who's walking away. This person, your double. You glimpse with dismay. They continue their strolling on down the park trail, while you melt into mist, a fog of gray veil. And that's why I won't go back to Mockingbird Park. I like being you. I hope you like the dark. When I went back home from my work, I was immediately bored and had nothing to do, so all I could do was play on my computer. However, this was one bizarre experience I still have to this day. As I turned on my computer, I noticed something off from my desktop started to pop out. I saw that nothing was left in my desktop except for the recycle bin and an app called Corpse Party Betrayal. I was curious and completely confused at the same time. I mean, I didn't have the game in the first, nor did I buy it somewhere else. It was just mysteriously appeared, and for no apparent reason. Shaking that creeped out feeling, I clicked the app, not knowing what would happen next. When the app was now launching, there was a black screen that lasted for 10 seconds. Then I realized that the company logo never popped up, and instead, I was in the game already. The title was Corpse Party Betrayal. It was weird, I didn't recognize the game, as I was never an official game in the Corpse Party series. After the title vanished, then I started seeing static in the game. It flickered for twice until I was in the game. I realized that I was in the school grounds, more specifically in the hallway. Satoshi Moshida and his younger sister Yoko were there. Then I realized that this was a cutscene, and I was not controlling him. Oni-chan, it was your fault. What have you done to yourself? This piece of shit is nothing more than a ludicrous crap. Oni-chan, bullshit. Stop calling me brother, Yuko. After that argument, Satoshi left, leaving Yuko behind terrified. I was now controlling her and had to chase him. Pretty strange. As I controlled Yuko, I saw more of the commotion as he appeared Seiko Shinohara. I had enough of this utter bullshit. What's the matter? I don't want to say anything. Just fuck off and die. What the hell was happening? Why was he like this? He was not like the survivor in this place, but rather a defiant fuck. He viciously attacked Shino, killing her. There was a scream for 3 seconds. After the brief cutscene, I began to get terrified at the madness that Satoshi was doing. The next thing I knew, I was my character, and another cutscene played, this time much longer. Satoshi was standing at the hallway, and suddenly Ayumi Shinozaki appeared and approached him. You don't know shit about me. What did I do to you? Just leave me alone. He approached Yumi and attacked her. This time her scream was disturbingly loud, so loud that it nearly pierced my ears. He stabbed her viciously as the cutscene ended. He was getting more and more disturbed by now. I want more victims, he said. The same thing really happened. He killed every character like zombies on his path. Apparently the main antagonist now is Satoshi, not the child spirit roaming around and attacking the students of the school in more ways than one. His trail of murderous killings with them were vicious as his penalty shifted from one innocent young boy to a deranged killer. Several hours later, I was now in the classroom, and Yui Shido, the teacher of Class 2-9, was there. The cutscene played again. This time, I had the most disturbing discovery ever. Satoshi's face was completely empty and pitch black. His smile had stretched wider at the side of his head, and he had a chilling grin. He looked right at me. Right at me. I want your flesh. What's the matter, Satoshi? Then the screen cut to black, and I heard screaming. Suddenly, like she was being violently killed. And after that, I was back in the other world. But this time, Satoshi approached Yuko. I'm sick of ingots like you. This is between us, Yuko. He took another step towards her. Oni-chan, snap out of it. Yuko was panicking more. I want your flesh. The screen cut to black, and there was a scream that lasted for 10 seconds. After that, I eventually saw a disturbing image. It was an image of Satoshi above, with his mutilated victim in the bottom. He screamed in terror. This Satoshi is a monster. I mean, he just tried to kill them. For something, Satoshi was nothing more than a betrayer. The game closed, and I realized that it was not in my computer anymore. After that experience, I was so disturbed of what happened to that horrid teenage boy, turning his back against them, and went on a killing spree. I watched Madoka Magica a lot, and I'm a big fan of the series. One day, I found something at a yard sale. It was called Madoka Magica Episode 13, the lost episode. I looked at the tape and I was curious, and I took it to the man who was doing the yard sale. It costed around $6.66. When I got home, I put it into my VHS player. It started with the usual intro, but it was pitched to make it seem slower. When the actual episode started, Madoka was going to school with her friends until she got a phone call from Mommy. The call went as followed. Hello, Madoka said. Hi, it's Mommy. I would like to let you know that Homura is dead. Mommy said. What? Why did she die? Madoka said. I don't know how she died, but I'm skipping school today so I can investigate her death. Okay, bye. There was a title card saying, After School. Madoka was in her room, sad. Madoka grabbed a knife and said, I must go along with her. See you soon. But I want to live. I have a whole life to live. She was dead, lying on the floor. Then it goes on to Sayaka, who was laying on the floor. She was dead a few hours ago. Then it goes to Mommy. She couldn't seem to get Homura's cause of death, so she kills herself. Kyoko tries to call Sayaka's name and trying to look for her, but she trips on Sayaka's body and dies. There's a title card that says 4 months later. There were funerals for Madoka, Homura, Sayako, Kyoko, and Mommy. Their profiles looked like the ones from Dengapara. Everyone at the funeral was crying. Their parents were crying so loud, their children were dead. The episode ended with the end. The episode ended with Magia playing in the background really slow. After that, I took the tape out of my VHS player, and I took it to the man who was doing the yard sale and returned it to him. He said, I'm sorry you had to see that. I will give you your money back. I said, alright. The man said, have a nice rest of your day. I said, you too. I never wanted to see that tape again. Cardcaptor Sakura was an anime series produced by the Madhouse Studio, adding 70 episodes divided by 3 seasons, 2 movies, and 3 OVA specials. Who wouldn't love it? It was and always will be one of my favorite anime. But it was a long time ago without watching the anime. Want to know why? I cannot identify myself, but I live in the city of Santiago de Compostela, Galicia, Spain. I am 28 years old. I live with my girlfriend and my 23-year-old sister. At the time, my sister was doing interchange in Austria, though in 2015. One day, I was rummaging through the loft of my late-night house to see some of the boxes my sister left before she left. A box caught my attention. A box full of many DVDs of programs from the 90s and 2000s. Between them was a DVD of Cardcaptor Sakura. At the time, I was very happy because this was my favorite anime. I watched a lot with my sister, and mainly, I made cosplays of the anime. I found something very wrong on the cover with the package. The cover seemed to have been ripped off and in place of it was written text. but I did not pay much attention to it. The DVD looked strange still. It was all white and written on top, episode 59B, grossly, with black pen. I did not care much for this and put it in my DVD player, but strange things caught my attention. The opening, and especially the name of the episode, did not appear. I was kind of fucking for it and did not call. The beginning of the episode was one dialogue between Sakura and Tomio in a garden, talking about the events of such an early episode, which was disappearance of Tomio. At least started normal. Nothing out of the ordinary. Barely knew this shit would happen. After the conversation is spread for a 2-minute act, the scene cuts to them in a museum, seeing works of art. But one thing caught my attention, a pretty bizarre work of art. A painting depicted a naked person in the pool of blood. I was a bit scared. How would a childish drawing like this show such a thing? But they just walked past it without even noticing it. Suddenly, the camera turned to the ceiling and revealed that there was a big hole. At this point, a very strong static sound began to come out of the speakers. I thought it was just some bug, and incredible as it may sound, the speakers were working normally. Even with the audio knocked out, I could see some sort of red hand pulling some people, and then I could see a lot of blood coming out of the hole, and then, Sakura finds out she's one of the living things, or little monsters, Cloud Card, and goes after it to capture them. I noticed something very strange. Kerberos was not on your shoulder. The audio at this time back to normal, but the audio jumped into the Japanese dubbing. At this point, I managed to understand anything, but I kept going anyway. When the screen cut to black by surprise, at the moment, something had been censored for a reason. I did not understand why. The act stretched for a minute. Suddenly, he cuts through the battle scene. What I found most bizarre was Sakura's uniform, a gray robe with black stripes and blood red. And the cloud card looking too bizarre to talk about. A giant demon with 2 yellow eyes. And I wanted to say one thing. The demon did not look like an animal character, but a very realistic thing. So real that it seemed live action. And I was a bit traumatized. But the creature like that would not appear or in a childlike drawing. Well, at least the fight was like any other anime fight. Sakura applied her famous blows and etc. By the end of the fight, it was awful. When Sakura captured the demon, that's when it all started. Horrible, agonizing scream that could only be described as a scream of a man being tortured in sharp 8-bit tones. The camera showed Sakura's face, and what I saw was terrifying. Flashes showed pictures of victims of the Armenian genocide, authentic cleansing committed by the Ottomans against the Armenians, women being raped, and elderly people killed in auto accidents. Shit, I was so disgusted that I nearly threw up, but continued. Around Sakura was on fire. You could clearly see her bleeding nose and her skin getting fainter. It stretched for an act for almost half a minute, until she fell to the ground. I did not believe what I saw. Sakura was dead. I started to cry violently. I was scared. I did not believe Sakura was dead, until on TV a Polish text appeared. Luckily, I managed to translate it because my father was born in Krakow, Poland. No more hope. The screen cut to red for about 2 to 3 minutes. After that, the act cut to the dialogue between Sharon, Tomio, Toya, and Fujika. Tomio was crying too loud. This time, finally, the audio was in Spanish. Then I could understand the dialogue. What a horrible tragedy, Tomio. Really, I can't lose my friends. Father, who's going to take care of the funeral arrangements? Tomio, leave it to me. You bring the coffin. Great. She was really beautiful. At this point, after the first, she was really beautiful, the audio started to jump in some language I didn't understand, probably Turkish. And from there, I started to understand. But at the end of the act, I heard a voice shouting, "I can't take it anymore." It was Tomio. It turned out that she was holding a gun to her head. She pulled the trigger. At this time of the shot, I swear I did not hear the sound of the speakers, but it seemed to not heard from somewhere in my house. I did not check it because it was almost 3:35 in the morning, and something made me watch the episode. I did not care about it and kept watching. After the end of the act, the screen blinked in black and white for about 10 seconds, and suddenly another phrase in Polish appeared. "Thank you for playing with me. Hell awaits for you." I jumped off the couch after reading the sentence, but something else scared me even more. A horrible scream echoed from my loudspeaker. The scream showed Sakura's face with wide eyes without expression and mouth. I threw myself on the floor and fainted. The horrible noise continued for a long time. Even my neighbors had to call the police. I was woken by an officer at 7 in the morning. They said they found me in a pool of blood coming from my mouth, while a loud scream came from the TV that was off. I quickly went to my DVD player and saw it was off, but the episode DVD was still there. I waited for the cops to leave my house to take the DVD and put it back in the box. But when I went to the packing box, there was a paper on it. It was written an address from a rental company in La Corona. I took the DVD to the address through eBay, and the buyers told me the episode should never have been shown, but it was broadcast in South Spain and Portugal, and that one copy of the episode was left and he bought it, even though he said that almost all copies were destroyed. 2 years have passed, and I will not forget that day in my life. I swear, after that day, I had to undergo 2 surgeries in my brain because of the cerebral hemorrhage, but at least that episode is in a better place, burning in hell. My cousin Morgan used to work at Cartoon Network. He used to produce episodes of such shows as Chowder, The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, and other long shows of a Filipino girl named Mira and Vera, another who was Korean descent. One day, he had an urge for an episode of Chowder, entitled Dead Mung. He gave me the script and tape he made of Dead Mung. He told me that he had written the digital script while Maria reversed the mistakes and Vera had done the animation for the tape. Naturally, I was excited because he had never brought home anything from work before. Looking at the title, I thought it was some sort of morbid joke he made, and I figured it would turn out to be just a regular episode. When I did watch the tape, I was very dumbfounded. The original intro appeared as normal, except at the very end when the title was shown, and immediately cut to black afterwards. The usual clapping couldn't be heard either. Instead, there was a low growl that lasted for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't just a regular dog growling either. It sounded more like a combination between a wolf and a grizzly bear getting angry, and the creature was just about to rip someone's face off. The screen came up saying Dead Mung. It was nothing special. It was just black text in a very fancy font up against a blood-red background. Then it showed Chowder trying to cook something like starfish fruit pudding in the kitchen. As usual, he kept messing up the dish, getting more frustrated with each time he fucked up even more. At this time, Mung entered the kitchen. Thick, heavy smoke like the mist of dry ice filled the air because Chowder had burned whatever he was making. Mung, now very angry, started yelling at Chowder. "You son of a bitch, what the fuck are you trying to do here? Kill me? I would have liked to see you try." At the moment, Chowder gouged out Mung's eyes with his bare hands, and blood began to pour profusely out the master's eye sockets. He then shoved Mung into an oven. Mung struggled to get out and gasped for air. And then he asked one last thing. "What are you trying to make?" Chowder answered with, "Schnitzel." Mung burned to death in the oven. Chowder then took him out of the oven and let him cool. Then after the cooling, Chowder pulled out a butcher knife from his back pocket and ripped out his intestines and organs. Someone, a customer, came in at the moment and saw Chowder pulled out Mung's innards. Chowder threw the butcher knife, hitting the customer in the eye, skewering it. Chowder skinned Mung and threw it out. He began eating Mung with a demonic, demented, and contorted face while blood seeped out of his mouth. Truffles appeared and joined in on the feast. Chowder finished Mung and threw his bones away. Truffles then exited the room with blood dripping down her face. Chowder stared at the camera with a demonic, twisted look on his face for about 3 minutes. He screamed like a banshee chipmunk being tortured alive, and then the screen went black. The text appeared in a plain, dark blue font saying, "The End," against the river of blood with fine, unholy creatures that were very hard to see in the background. I asked my cousin why he made this horrible cartoon. He didn't answer. A week later, I got a call from my puzzled aunt saying he had murdered several children and he was going to prison for it. I told her about the cartoon he made and how it was about a Chowder cartoon that was never put on air for obvious reasons. Now when I visit my cousin in prison, I try to ask why he made the cartoon. He still won't tell me, even to this day. The following entry is written by Alfred White. His whereabouts are disclosed at the moment, but he was willing to send me this email in 2005. Per agreement, I was able to share this to the public. I worked as a light board operator alongside the production staff for the BBC television series Jigsaw from 1979 to 1984, so I was presented throughout much of the show he's airing. Clive Dung, now retired, was the director and writer. The show was hosted by Adriana Haley, a mime artist who performed several roles in the show, including a sinister character named Mr. Nosybonk, who was seen with a prominent nose, toothy grin, and offset circular eyes. Nosybonk always stuck to me as a somewhat frightening character, but I never openly opposed to the idea since I wasn't entirely in charge of the production. The show had an overall cheery mood and guided viewers in puzzle-solving skills, so the cast was mostly friendly and inviting. There was never a moment I had dreaded my job. On May 31st, 1984, a week after the final episode had been aired, I was invited back to the studio by Clark Andrew, the set designer. After some time, he coaxed me into the viewing room, despite the fact that full production of the show had ceased and most of the cast and crew were now packing up. He told me that he needed to air one final episode of the series before it was too late. I nodded, somewhat confused, but I did not question his motives. As usual, the screening started. The opening sequence began the episode, but at the end of the song, there was nothing but complete darkness. "What's this?" I asked. "What's going on?" Clark looked at me with a condescending stare and turned his attention back to the screen. "Do not question," he responded. Suddenly, there appeared Nosybonk, playing miniature golf, footage from a previous episode, but the film had been corrupted and appeared shoddy and converted into vintage B&W. I remained silent, as did the audio in the film, and continued to watch nervously. Oddly, however, the video stopped abruptly and the tape was rejected. Clark motioned me back outside, locked the reviewing room, and greeted me a farewell. When he drove off, however, my curiosity got the best of me. I went back inside the studio through the front door and attempted to break down the viewing room, to no avail. One of the remaining cast members suddenly approached me from the corridor and offered to unlock it for me. "There you go," she said. "Don't forget to lock it on your way out." Now alone, I peeked inside and grabbed the tape on the topmost storage shelf. Before slipping into the VCR, I dusted it off. I sat near the door in case I needed to make a brief escape. The film started once again as Clark had previously showed me, and continued further after the supposed ending point. At this point, a faint humming began, but the film still remained silent. The scene changed suddenly and showed Nosybonk at the dinner table in a dimly lit room, a knife sitting alongside him on the table. Nosybonk looked to the screen briefly before setting his head down on the table. The film remained this way for a good 30 seconds before it switched to a new scene, in which Nosybonk was now seen disproportionately hopping around in a sack. Another scene merged with it, but I could not make out what it was, except that I could somewhat see Nosybonk's mask. Murmuring began and some faint screams could be heard. A quick flash of one of the cast members' faces appeared before the film ended. The tape rejected. I was relieved, but sat idly in the chair for well over a few minutes. When I had mustered the strength to physically grab the tape, I tossed it into the trash bin nearby, ran straight out of the performing studio, and drove off into the distance. I never returned. Not once. Not ever. I once told my wife about the incident, but she was mostly skeptical. I have since decided to disclose this information regarding the issue, and experience what I would call a normal life. The episode was allegedly aired thereafter on a very obscure channel that was only available in localized areas, so, as a result, went relatively unnoticed. In 2009, a video containing the episode was uploaded briefly to YouTube, but was removed upon the next day. In an internet discussion in 1995, claims they were made that an alternate version of the series altogether may exist. The proposed set designer Clark Andrew was reportedly one of the few remaining in the studio after each filming. Tapes labeling with peculiar codes were also said to be found in Clark's office, but were apparently discarded. He disappeared without a trace in 1985, the following year. Subsequently, another corrupt episode was reported to have been uploaded to a media site under an .mp4 file. If you're a fan of improv comedy, then you probably have heard of Whose Line Is It Anyway? It was one of the best comedy shows on TV, the best one on ABC, for sure. However, one installment of the show that I watched was undoubtedly creepy. Here's what you have to understand my disturbance. Whose Line Is It Anyway first originated as a radio series in the United Kingdom before coming to TV in 1988, which lasted until 1998. It was a fake game show with a host and 4 contestants. There were several games in the show, based on the audience shouted. Contestants acted out improvised sketch until the host pressed the buzzer to stop the sketch. The next game began. Drew Carey was the host of the US version to 1998 to 2007. All the contestants had good relationships. Most notably were friendship between Ryan and Colin. Between Ryan and Drew, the hosts, keep that in mind. 12 years ago, around 2001 or 2002, I was channel surfing and occasionally switched to Whose Line. Drew was pressing the buzzer and laughing his butt off. The audience was applauding and cheering. And the guys were standing on stage, all 4 of them smiling. Some game had just finished, and I could have missed some really great stuff. Drew's laughter was hysterical. That was where things went totally wrong. Drew just would not stop laughing. As the guys took their seats backstage, it was time for Drew to make another point-related joke and announce the next stage. Instead, he just laughed and laughed. There was an awkward pause. The confused contestants began to look at each other. That was when Ryan began to act strangely. He was just staring at Drew, observing him motionlessly. He was hypnotized or frightened. It was really creepy. Drew started to cough severely. He rose from his desk and tried to go somewhere, but he suddenly fell over, face down onto the stage. The audience went silent. I don't know why. The camera was focused on Drew, and occasionally the guys. I think it was shock, because even I felt it while watching. What the hell? Why would they show such a thing? What is going on here? When Drew fell over, all the guys jumped up from their seats, all except for Ryan. Instead of helping, he cringed and sat back. While still staring at antagonizing Drew, it was very unlikely for a friend to act like this. It appeared that he did not even care about Drew's health. Wayne was holding Drew while Colin slapped on his back. Brad poured a glass of water for Drew. "Do you need any help?" someone shouted. I think it was from the audience. Nobody bothered to respond, though. The cast talked to each other, visibly concerned about the whole mess. You could not figure out a single word. The microphones would have switched off for some reason, or whatever, I don't know. Colin said something to Ryan. Maybe he even shouted it. Ryan did not answer. He just shook his head and shrank back even more. I watched, freaking out. Why did they show us somebody choking nearly to death during prime time? Is this supposed to be funny routine? I'm not the type of person who complains about TV stuff and writes protest letters, but if this was the case for it, are they out of their mind? Drew was still trying to clear his throat. Suddenly, he coughed blood. "Fuck," shouted someone loudly. I think it was someone from the crew. Maybe Dan Patterson, the producer? I was totally confused. The program was usually very censored, so was this unedited? Filmed live? But why would they broadcast it? I had no idea. This lasted for another 10 minutes. Nobody else came in. Nobody tried to resolve the problem. Laura Hall, the musician, was not present on the piano. However, she usually was not there during non-musical rounds, so the last game must have been one of those. At the end, Drew was not showing any sign of life, or typical signs of death. Still, it was immensely creepy. The broadcast was abruptly interrupted for commercial break, after another Whose Line episode began, without any oddities in it whatsoever. So there you have it. As far as I know, nobody mentioned the incident in mass media or internet forums. The show was canceled in 2005, but Drew Carey is still hosting a couple of TV shows. He is safe and sound and still is friends with Ryan Stills. I watched all the episodes of the shows on TV, but never saw this particular one again. On one occasion, Drew had choked on water, but was quickly relieved. The whole thing took less than a minute, and Ryan was actually caring about Drew in this. As well, some Ryan hoedowns like, "I'll have my own show when I'll murder Drew Carey," becoming very creepy for me. However, this is basically all I have noticed. I still cannot make my mind about what it was. I know you hate me, but we were best friends once, and I need you to read this. I think I'm in serious trouble, and there's nothing you could do. but I need you to read this to understand. I know we haven't talked since sectionals. It's been forever. But what happened to you wasn't my fault. At least, it wasn't entirely my fault. I know everyone thinks it was, but I would never do anything to hurt you. This is going to sound crazy, but I need to tell you this so that someone knows. It started when we were in 8th grade. It was the night before the Crystal Classic competition. I was at home and I couldn't sleep because I was so nervous about competition. Well, I got on the computer, just sort of surfing the web and stuff, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. I was just sitting there, so I Googled myself. I never should have done that, Brie. At first, it was all the usual stuff you find when you Google yourself. When I found a link to a Wikipedia page about me, I thought our club or my dad made it or something. There wasn't much there, just some basic facts about skating, what city I lived in. But the thing that got me was what it said. I won the year's Crystal Classic. I laughed. I thought for sure something just did it to encourage me. I confronted my dad about it, but he denied it. When I won the competition that day, I was so happy. That the first competition I'd ever won, and it felt so good. Remember how hard I worked after that? That's when my parents hired Sergey to coach me. You know how much it must have cost? After that, I would check my page before every competition, and it would always tell the results of how I placed. It said I would win the regional at 15, and it all came true. After that, Sergey convinced my mom and dad that I had a real shot at the Olympics. That's when they pulled me from school. I skated every day, but I just wasn't progressing the way Sergey said I needed to if I wanted a shot at the championship. I was working so hard, and I was skating well. But still, Sergey said it wasn't good enough. When the sectionals came, all I could think about was winning, so I did something I shouldn't have. Everyone was saying that you were the favorite, and I felt like I had already lost the competition, so I made a Wikipedia account and tried to update my page to say that I was the winner. The thing is that I tried to update the page, I checked it on, and all it said was, Alana Petrova is a selfish little bitch who is going to get what she deserves. I broke down. That's why I looked so awful that day. I was in a daze. I remember watching your routine and seeing your blade snap, and the next thing I know, I was on the ground and my face was covered in blood from where the tip flew off and sliced my forehead. Then they told me it was my fault because I had my skates in my position earlier. Brie, I honestly didn't do anything to your skates. I wanted to win, but I wouldn't do anything to hurt you. When you told me I was banned from any further competitions, everyone said that I got what I deserve. Nobody even asked for my side of the story. I guess you heard that Sergey dropped me after that. He said I ruined him. No one would talk to me. Do you know what it's like to be ostracized by everyone? I couldn't even get ice time. And then the page got worse. Every time I checked it, it would say all these horrible things about me. I couldn't even tell you half of them. The language was so vile. I'd cry every time I read it, but I couldn't stop checking it. I knew I had to do something, so I made a complaint to Wikipedia. I even tried calling them, but no one claimed to know a thing about the page. I was home alone that Friday night, and I decided to check to see if it had been taken down. The page was still there, only this time it said, Arona Petrova is a pathetic little orphan. I freaked. I kept calling my parents to warn them, but every time I'd call, all I could hear was horrible laughter on the other end. I must have called them 100 times until I couldn't take the sound of the laughter anymore. After the incident, the police gave me their numbers, and there wasn't any record of the call that night. I was devastated. Before, I was so busy training all day and doing homeschool. I never realized just how alone I had been this whole time. I know you tried to reach out, but I was so depressed and angry I just shut everything out. Once I turned 18 and I got the settlement money from the court, I came to Switzerland. I got to renovate myself. My skating really took off. It hasn't been a year and I feel like everything had happened a long time ago. That's why I shouldn't have done it, Brie. I'm writing you now from an old hotel outside of Prague. I'm auditioning for the ice circus tomorrow. I know it's the kind of thing we used to make fun of, but I really want this. I was feeling really nervous, and out of an old habit, I checked my page. It's so hard to say this, but when I checked the page to see if I'd gotten the job tomorrow, all it says is, Orona Petrova died friendless and alone. And it's been today's date, listed in my date of death. I'm sobbing so hard, I could barely type all this. But I wanted you to know the truth. Please believe me, Bree. I attached a screenshot of the page so you'll believe me. It's all there just as I told you. I don't know what to do. I don't know anyone here and nobody speaks English. I keep refreshing the page. God, it's been forever. I keep refreshing, but it still hasn't changed. I'm waiting for midnight. I don't know what to do, so I locked myself in my room. There's only a few minutes to midnight now. All I can do is refresh the page. I'm exhausted, but I can't stop. I'm afraid to leave the computer until I know what happens next. I'm sure everyone remembers this SpongeBob episode, Safe Deposit Krabs, the episode when Mr. Krabs got himself locked in a safe deposit. Unfortunately, Nickelodeon's website had a planned episode planned from 2003 to 2005. The episode on the website was titled Mr. Krabs' Bankruptcy, which was supposed to be Safe Deposit Krabs, which was released later in 2013, from October 23, 2003 to December 12, 2005. One of the writers of Nickelodeon accidentally released the episode, 1 month before it was planned to be released. It was a quiet afternoon in 2013, right after the removal of supposed episode of SpongeBob. I was on YouTube and on paint.net, drawing and listening to some dubstep, death metal, or breakcore. Don't ask why I listen to breakcore. I suddenly got a message on DeviantArt from one of my fans of my art named Ratchet Retro, who said this: Nick's in some deep trouble. Look at 2013 in October. I replied with, "What's going on with Nick?" That's when he hit me with the reply that was so chilling, my spine actually tingled. SpongeBob's new episode is different. Might want to check it out. Thanks to my friend, I went on the Wayback Machine and went on Nickelodeon.com, where I placed the timeline in 2003, October. I was in shock and saw there, sitting on the front page with a message and a download link. New SpongeBob episode, MP4 download. Check it out here. The link was off, and the ad was Adfly, which was a website shorter, and I went on and my computer began to freak out. One of the worst viruses. The mouse froze, the screen glitched crazily, and it switched to BSOD. Might be shady link, I thought to myself. All of a sudden, I heard the mailbox went up, and I got up and checked the mail. For some reason, I got a small package and a note. I checked the note, and it said, "To whom click the link. This is the episode of the disc format. Mr. Lawrence, aka the voice of Plankton." I opened the package and checked the disc, when I noticed that it looked like a burnt disc. I went to my laptop computer and inserted the disc. For about 2 hours of rewinding, I hit the play button and cruised the episode. The theme song played as normal, but as soon as the theme song ended, the seagulls didn't make their normal call, and instead of Steven Hilberg, it was Paul Tibbet, which made me raise an eyebrow. The screen slowly faded in with the title card saying Mr. Krabs' Bankruptcy. It jump cuts to outside the Krusty Krab and Mr. Krabs playing with his money bowling. He said to himself and maybe the audience, "Nothing soothes me more than a stack of cash and some cash bowling." As he was about to do it again, SpongeBob burst through the door with a panicked expression. He was out of breath. Mr. Krabs, you have a letter." Mr. Krabs replied with, "Boy, you need to stop scaring me, audience." I rose, another eyebrow. Was he talking to us? My question was interrupted when the screen snapped to black and Mr. Krabs screaming. The camera positioned to Mr. Krabs' letter. It was from the National Bank of Bikini Bottom. It was saying how he never paid a single dollar and was going to remove the Krusty Krab and his home for tax evasion. Mr. Krabs let out a long sigh and went outside his office. He called out to SpongeBob and Squidward, then said, out of the blue, "We're gonna have to shut down the Krusty Krab forever." SpongeBob gasped and Squidward smiled. "Is it true?" Squidward said gleefully. Mr. Krabs nodded as Squidward danced for a second before laughing and running outside comedically. The bubbles came up and showed the repo man taking everything from the Krusty Krab and from his home, both at the same time before driving off in the distance. It cut to Mr. Krabs tearing up as he cried out of character. Pearl sat down in the middle of the remains and patted Mr. Krabs' back as she said, "It's gonna be alright, Mr. Krabs. Things would be better. I'm sure of it. Mr. Krabs sniffled and sighed. It cut to a montage of Mr. Krabs' depression increasing each week as mellow and sad music plays. In the last frame, it shows Mr. Krabs sitting on an apartment bed, then shows Mr. Krabs reaching to a cabinet nearby. He shuffles through stuff as he ends up picking up a butcher knife. He puts the butcher knife close to himself. With one slice, he could hear a crash noise and a scream from Mr. Krabs. The last frame was of Mr. Krabs' only $1 bill, now covered in cartoony blood as it slowly fades out and shows credits. I rarely had no reaction, but I was definitely screwed up, so I put the DVD back in the sleeve and placed it somewhere safe and far away. After a few months, I received a message from one of the writers of SpongeBob, Paul Tibbet, who said, "The person in the beginning, it's not me. I didn't make the episode." I had recently spawned a new world in a single-player Minecraft. Everything was normal at first as I began chopping down trees and crafting a workbench. I noticed something move amongst the dense fog. I had a very slow computer, so I had to play with the tinier radar distance. I thought it was a cow, so I pursued it, hoping to grab some hide for armor. It wasn't a cow, though. Looking back at me was another character with the default skin, but his eyes were empty. I saw no name pop up, and I double-checked to make sure it wasn't in multiplayer mode. He didn't stay long. He looked at me and quickly ran into the fog. I pursued out of curiosity, but he was gone. I continued on with the game, not sure what to think. As I expanded the world, I saw things that seemed out of place for the random map generator to make. 2x2 panels in the rocks, small perfect pyramids made of sand in the ocean, and grooves of trees with all their leaves cut off. I would constantly think I saw the other player in the deep fog, but I never got a better look at him. I tried increasing my radar distance to far whenever I thought I saw him, but to no avail. I saved the map and went on the forums to see if anyone else had found this pursued player. There was none. I created my own topic telling of the man and asking if anyone had a similar experience. The post was deleted within 5 minutes. I tried again, and the topic was deleted even faster. I tried a PM from username Herobrine, containing one word: stop. When I went back to look at Herobrine's profile, the page 404, I received an email with another from another forum user. He claimed the mods can read the forum user message, so we were safer using email. The emailer claimed that he had seen the mysterious player too, and had a small directory of other words he could use as well. These words were littered with oblivious man-made features as well, and described their mysterious player had no pupils. About a month passed until I heard from my informant again. Some of the people who were encountered the mysterious man had looked into the name Herobrine and found the name to be frequently used by a Swedish gamer. After some future information gathering, it was revealed to be the brother of Notch, the game's developer. I personally emailed Notch and asked him if he had a brother. It took him a while, but he emailed me back with a very short message. I did, but he's no longer with us. Notch. I haven't seen the mysterious man since our first encounter, and I haven't noticed any changes to the world other than my own. I was able to press print screen when I first saw him. Here's the only evidence I have of his existence. Anime is extremely popular the world over. Many of us enjoy watching things like shonen, action, and the like. However, I tend to like older anime, like Akari and Perfect Blue. Older animes don't shy away from things like violence, sex, and gore. Far cry from cartoons here in the West. One night I had a friend over. We had this tradition that every month we'd get together, binge watch anime for the entire night. As we brainstormed which anime to binge, one of my friends suggested something very obscure. Saki Sobanashi. All of us were puzzled. What is so obscure about it? I asked. Well, for starters, it can be found on the deep web, on a hentai gore site, according to my brother who gave me instructions on how to get there, which I had written down. My brother is an avid explorer for the deep web, and secondly, the story behind it is much more scarier than the anime itself. I'll save that for a story for when I get to finish with it, at least around 30 minutes. Alright, I guess, I responded. My other friends were ecstatic about it as well. After some time setting up the PC and whatnot, my friends proceeded to search for a video based on the instructions. He found it within 20 minutes of intense search and fierce scrolling. There it was, Saki Sobanashi. My friend explained it was an animated around the 80s and that it was very cheaply made. We all thought nothing of it really. But oh boy, we were wrong. First 15 minutes. The anime opened up with 9 girls stuck in a large bathroom without doors, windows, or mirrors. Only one faucet was drawn. These girls were all animated into a similar fashion, with only their hair being distinguished. Bear in mind, absolutely no effort was put into this. All of the movement came from their mouths, and shots were all the same. One of them was sitting together in the group, and the rest were similarly individual shots, with their hair being changed. What's more, it had no audio, only subtitles in Japanese which were translated to English. It is not known how they got there in the first place, but one could piece together theories based on their life stories. As an example, one of the girls, who had a him blonde haircut, was the daughter of a Yakuza member, while the other, same face but with black hair and no bangs, was of a well-established politician. Think what you want of the information, but I can care less. This is the least important information. The mood of the anime starts out very positive. These girls, despite their circumstances, have hope that they'll find a way out. One was religious. She cited about how beliefs in God gave her a promise of a happy ending. The 2 others, with powerful parents, believed they'd find them just in time. Everything happens for a reason in life, one said. At this point, I thought it was pretty odd. They'd act so calmly considering their situation, but my friend assured me to go with it. The girls told philosophical stories to each other. The screen faded to black. Last 15 minutes. A red text appeared in Japanese. Translated to English, it said, 5 days later. At this point, the girls looked like they were starving. Their eyes were as lifeless as their body. As it turns out, none of them had eaten for 5 days. The blonde girl with the Heim cut even mentioned that she couldn't go to sleep out of hunger and pure fear. After a silent montage of each of the girls, the screen cut to the blonde girl screaming and yelling, the only audio throughout the whole video. My god, it sounded so authentic. The girl proceeded to smash her head into the wall. I lost count of how many times she did it. What shocked me the most was that none of the girls bothered to help her. My god, the drawings were so precise despite how cheaply made it was. Only a madman could have made this. Suddenly, the montage started yet again. This time, it cut to one of the girls scratching her neck intensively, letting out as much blood as she could. A few other girls followed. The girl with black hair asked one of the girls to drown her in the sink, because she simply couldn't do it herself. I witnessed her being held down by her friend as she drowned. The anime ended with a shot of the girls lying down on the bathroom floor, all of them dead. The screen then faded to black. What the hell, man? Shouted one of my friends. We were all shocked, but we kept our composure. Honestly, I was pretty desensitized to this stuff. Same. However, I wasn't prepared, my friend explained afterwards. The truth was, the anime was written and mostly drawn by a serial killer who had lurked the shadows of Japan beginning in the 80s. The anime was supposedly created before he drugged and trapped these innocent girls in the bathroom. But it was said that the audio of the blonde girl screaming was one of his previous victims. It is estimated he took around 6 years, starting in the late 70s, to complete the animation by himself, which could explain the cheap quality of it. He was never found. The only thing found was the infamous bathroom alongside the bodies with the tape containing the anime. For a long time, the anime was stored away only to be rediscovered in 2018 after a leak. It was theorized the police preserved the tape digitally for further study. Due to censorship, you couldn't find it on the regular web. Anyway, the only reason I wrote this was to bring attention to the case, and hopefully, they'll eventually catch whoever did this and bring justice to the innocent murdered girls.
あるところに小さな夢がありました。
誰が見たのかわからない。それは小さな夢でした。
小さな夢は思いました。このまま消えていくのは嫌だ。どうすれば人に僕を見てもらえるだろう。
小さな夢は考えて考えて、そしてついに思いつきました。
人間を自分の中に迷い込ませて、世界を作らせればいいと。
The Alice killings remain to this day one of the strangest and unsolvable serial killings in Japan. From 1999 to 2005, a series of 5 killings took place. The 5 killings might have been completely different, if not for their calling card that the killer left at each crime scene. He would leave a playing card and varied from killing to killing, at each scene in an obvious location that had Alice written on it in its victim's blood. Very few clues were found at each crime scene. Eventually, the case went cold. Below are details of each killing. The first victim was Sasaki Megami, a 29-year-old owner of a restaurant. Those who knew her described her as a strong-headed woman with a short temper and a sharp tongue when dealing with her employees. She was known by her customers for her fine cooking and her dedication to her job. Outside of her job, Megami was very social and often went to parties. It was after one such party that she went missing. She decided to walk home from her friend's house, seeing as she was just a block from home. She was a bit too drunk to drive. Several people offered to drive her home, but she shrugged it off. She was seen leaving the party at 1 in the morning, and that was the last time she was seen alive. The next morning, a couple walking in the woods about a mile from Megami's house saw a large amount of blood of an overgrown, unseen path. Curious, they followed it, where they found Megami's body. She had been torn apart, her parts impaled on various tree branches. The couple called the police. It was the police that found the playing card, crammed into Megami's mouth. It was a jack of spades, which had the word Alice written on it. As previously mentioned, there was no fingerprints or any DNA to be found. There was vomit at the scene, but the female of the couple admitted that it was hers. Yamane Akino was a barely known singer in a band that never played anything more than at various bars and community factions. His friends described him as a kind-hearted man who would never raise his voice off stage. After his death, his band fell apart, not having the heart to find a new singer. Akio was abducted from his apartment on February 11th, 2001. His bandmates were the last people to see him alive, as he had practiced with them earlier that day. That night, his girlfriend came to visit him and was surprised to find the house empty. Within days, a missing persons report was filed, and a search for him began. On the security footage of the apartment, a hooded figure could be seen entering through the side door and leaving a large garbage bag that bulged strangely. This strange appearance was never accounted for, and no one saw the strange man in person. This man is widely believed to be the killer, but his face was never shown, and there appears to be some doubt. The following week, the owner of the bar, Yoshida's, where the band had often performed, was opening for the day and was met with a grisly sight. Slumped at the table was Akio's body. His vocal cords had been ripped out from his throat, and he had been shot in the head. His Alice card was a king of diamonds. It was found clutched in his hands, along with his ruined vocal cords. A teenage girl, Kai Sakura, had her whole life ahead of her. She was a sweet girl and loved by her classmates and relatives. She wanted to go to college to be a fashion designer and was a week from graduating high school when she was abducted. Sakura's family was frantic trying to find her. The whole town was combed for the lost girl. Her body was found 2 days later, buried in a shallow grave. It didn't seem that the killer wanted her hidden. On the contrary, he had marked her grave with the Alice playing card, the Queen of Clubs. It had been taped on a stick and stuck on top of the grave. Sakura's body had been horribly mutilated. Her eyes had been carved from her body, her skin was flayed, and her mouth had been carved open. A crown had been sewn onto her head, likely while she was still alive. No sexual crimes had been committed. either pre or post-mortem. Along with Sakura's body was a note, written in straggly handwriting. It contained many disjointed phrases, some of which were unreadable. Death is a distorted dream. She will never rule, and, haha, those which die are the lucky ones, were various phrases that had been written among others. A match of the handwriting was never found. These two were the last of the killings, and the least gruesome. Hayata and Hina were siblings, and very close. Hina was the elder sister and was very stubborn. Her younger brother, Hayata, was very smart and had skipped a grade, causing him to be the same class as his beloved sister. The two rarely fought, as most siblings tended to do. The two were found dead in their beds on April 4th, 2005. The cause of the death was a lethal injection. The children's bedroom window was wide open, and it was deduced that the killer snuck in quietly enough to kill the two without waking them, then snuck back out. Each child held half of an Ace of Hearts playing card that, when put together, spelled out the word ace. One very smudged fingerprint was found on their carpet, but closer inspection was made impossible by the severe damage done to the print. This was the only piece of evidence, other than the playing card, left at the scene. A year later, the mother of Hayato and Hina committed suicide out of grief. Their father, who is still alive to this day, is going through extensive therapy to get over the death of his entire family. At this moment, he is extremely depressed and heavily medicated. Shortly after the cause of death of the Ashura sibling, a man named Suzuki Yuto was arrested for the murders. He was a bum with mental problems, who claimed to not remember where he was at the time of any of the murders. Most damning of them all, he was seen wearing a coat that belonged to Yamane Akio. A bit of the blood on the sleeve tested positive to be his. Yuto, who was raving at this point, claimed that a demon black man with no face had given him the coat. Yato was eventually released when a homeless shelter 5 miles from Kai's household claimed to have Yuto in their files for the night of Sakura's murder. Since there was no way for him to get to where she was abducted and back without being noticed, Yato was released. On April 30th, 2008, a producer known as Yogami P uploaded his first song to Nico video called Hitobashira Arasu, translated roughly as Alice of Human Sacrifice. The song is believed to be based off the Alice killings. It tells the story of a little dream who lures people into its world, and then goes to tell the story of each Alice. The song had a few parallels with each killing. The first Alice, depicted as Miko, was trapped in the woods, which is where Megami's body was found. The second Alice, depicted as Kaito, was a singer who was shot by a madman. The third Alice, depicted by Hatsune Miku, was well-loved, became the country's queen, was taken over by a distorted dream. The fourth Alice, depicted as Kagami, Rin, and Lin, was a pair of twins regarded as one Alice. They were described as stubborn big sister and an intelligent young brother. It also speaks of how they are yet to awake, a possible reference to them dying in their sleep. In addition, the suits of cards found with each body are also mentioned. Yogami P has not stated for sure if the song has any relation to the Alice killings, but it is widely assumed.